All right, welcome to everyone to this evening's hearing on the Climate Protection Program. We're very glad that you could all join us to hear from you, most importantly, about this very important ongoing work. So the schedule for this hearing is on the screen, and you can see we have divided our conversation tonight into a brief opening and presentation, and then we're going to have several blocks of comments. And we are very pleased to have a Spanish interpreter with us this afternoon, and welcome the participation of our Spanish-speaking friends and of all the many people who are joining us as we speak to share their thoughts on this important issue.
Hola, buenas tardes, bienvenidos a nuestra junta de esta tarde de EQ. Estamos aquí más que nada para hablar con ustedes, queremos escuchar. Buenas tardes, estamos aquí para la reunión de EQ, la presentación. Estamos aquí agradecidos que nos pueden estar con ustedes esta noche. Queremos más que nada su opinión a lo que ustedes están pensando para informar esta junta. Este es el horario que vamos a tener.
So there are several ways to submit comments on the proposed rules. So folks are going to be able to testify here today at the hearing, but they can also submit written comments through the email at ghgcr2021@deq.state.or.us. And don't worry, that address is available on DEQ's website, so you don't have to memorize it or catch it on the fly. And we just announced today that there is an extension of the public comment period, so that will give people an additional amount of time to get their comments in. As we move forward tonight, Stephanie Caldera, our EQC assistant, will operate the comments process. Now, as a reminder, everybody, please, there's 2 minutes per commenter. And please do respect this time limit so that we may hear from as many people as possible. So just to reiterate, we really owe it to one another to treat every one of our many commenters with the respect of giving their full 2 minutes. So I do ask that we show each other that respect tonight and not take time from another speaker who wants to also share their ideas. And then later in the hearing, we will provide directions on how to request a comment, but we're going to go ahead and start with a group of pre-registered commenters.
At this time, Nicole Singh will present DEQ's staff presentation. Please do not raise your hand yet to request to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. And as you're pulling up the presentation, I'm just going to go ahead and get started. I think the first thing we do want to make sure everyone knows is there'll be a slide here soon with the resources that have been put out to support this proposed rulemaking. There's a lot of information in the proposed draft rules. This includes an overview, a procedural summary, and also the fiscal impact statement. I'm going to pause here for our translator.
Esta noche vamos a estar aquí por parte del programa. Queremos hablar, va a ser diferentes partes, va a estar dividido. Vamos a hacer primeramente la presentación y después vamos a averiguar cómo vamos a hacer esto. Por favor, espérense hasta que la parte de dar testimonio pase, mientras no levanten sus manitas.
Okay, Stephanie, if you can move to the next slide. Again, here's our website. And if you want to go to the next slide, Stephanie. We also have released some supporting documents along with the notice of proposed rulemaking. You can see here we had 3 attachments. We did also want to let everyone know that we released what we're calling an overview of the proposed program, a not so brief 4-page summary, but it does provide an overview of the program.
Y aquí, como pueden ver, es un poquito sobre documentos que apoyan programa, esta protección del clima. Esos documentos son como antecedentes con la noticia. También está un resumen de la regla que se propone. Y también parece que hay disponible 4 páginas adicionales, pero no están aquí incluidas.
Next slide, please, Stephanie. So here again are the instructions on how to comment. These slides are posted on the website, so I won't go through them, but we just wanted everyone to see all the ways, again, in which you can provide comment, email, public hearings, and mail.
Y una vez más, aquí está cómo puede usted compartir sus comentarios. Ustedes, como pueden ver, hay diferentes maneras de hacerlo. Tienen esas opciones. No voy a repasarlos porque a lo mejor ya los conocen. También los pueden encontrar en la página web.
Next slide, please. So again, we do not plan to review the proposed climate protection program today. That's way too much for us to cover, and we want to hear your comments. But I did want to highlight a few things. First, the purposes of the climate protection program. That includes reducing greenhouse gas emissions and also achieving co-benefits from other air contaminant reductions.
También no voy a pasar mucho tiempo aquí, no vamos a repasar tampoco la regla porque es bastante grande, pero más que nada vamos a repasar la meta que tenemos aquí y más que nada son tres cosas: reducir las emisiones y también de cómo podemos tener beneficios juntos, ambos partes.
Another purpose, of course, is to enhance public welfare for Oregon communities, particularly our environmental justice communities, including our communities of color, tribal, low-income, and rural communities. And Stephanie, I'll ask you to just go to the next slide.
Y también eso incluye pues, los beneficios que a las comunidades que son más que nada impactadas, comunidades de color, que son comunidades rurales. Queremos saber y entender mejor cómo disminuir esos efectos al ambiente en esas partes.
Next slide, please. To support these purposes, CPP requires that covered entities reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It also supports reduction of emissions of other air contaminants that are not greenhouse gases.
Otra parte también es para respaldar esos propósitos. Requiere que las entidades cubiertas reduzcan las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero, también apoyando la reducción de emisiones de otros contaminantes atmosféricos que no son gases de efecto invernadero.
Next slide. It also prioritizes reduction of greenhouse gases and other air contaminants, again, in environmental justice communities, which are disproportionately burdened by the effects of climate change and air contamination.
También prioriza la reducción de gases de efecto invernadero y otros contaminantes del aire en comunidades de justicia ambiental, desproporcionadamente agobiadas por los efectos del cambio climático y la contaminación del aire.
It provides covered entities with options to minimize business and consumer economic impacts, and it allows covered entities to comply in part with what we have called the community climate investments.
Y también eso ayuda para las entidades que están cubiertas bajo estas normas con otras opciones para que puedan cumplir y minimizar los impactos económicos de esos negocios y consumidores.
Next slide, please. Again, the CCIs, the covered fuel suppliers, can earn these credits by contributing funds to third-party entities to implement projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Oregon.
Y esto básicamente a los proveedores de combustibles pueden obtener créditos CCI contribuyendo con fondos a entidades de terceros para implementar proyectos que reduzcan las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero en Oregon.
Next slide, please. The proposed CPP will implement declining enforceable limits on greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels in Oregon.
Esto ayudaría para declinar de los niveles máximos de emisión causados por emisiones de combustibles fósiles en Oregon.
Next slide, please. And the way in which the CPP does that is it's going to be regulating the entities that you see on this slide. So the program is going to be regulating our 3 natural gas utilities that supply nearly all natural gas to end users in Oregon. So that's natural gas used in our homes, our businesses, our facilities. We're also going to be regulating suppliers of gasoline, diesel, kerosene, and propane with emissions that meet or exceed a certain threshold for inclusion. That threshold does start at 200,000 metric tons, and then it will decline to 25,000 metric tons.
Y la manera que vamos a hacer esto parece que una sería las empresas públicas de distribución de gas natural, que suministran casi todo el gas natural a los usuarios aquí en Oregon. Eso incluye los negocios, las casas y cualquier persona. Proveedores de gasolina también, incluyendo diésel, queroseno y propano, con emisiones que cumplen o exceden el nivel de inclusión. Porque ahorita parece que son 200,000 toneladas métricas y queremos que se disminuya a 25,000 toneladas métricas.
Next slide, please. So here you see the proposed emissions cap for the limit for our fossil fuel suppliers. The program starts in 2022 with approximately a limit of 28 million tons, and that will decline down to 6 million tons in 2050. The trajectory that you see here is based on a reduction of 45% by 2035 and 80% by 2050.
Y básicamente queremos aquí capar ahorita actualmente 22,000, es básicamente 28 toneladas métricas, y queremos que a través de la grafa que se disminuya, y la meta es de que al 2050 sería como 6 millones de toneladas métricas del uso de los fósiles combustibles y límites para la emisión.
Next slide, please. The proposed CPP also includes a best available emissions reduction approach. This is for other site-specific emissions at facilities. So again, natural gas emissions are being addressed at the natural gas utilities, but we have industrial process emissions. We might also have emissions due to solid fuels. And we also potentially get to have emissions that are from the use of natural gas from the pipeline.
Eso también el enfoque de reducción de emisiones disponible para otras emisiones específicas del sitio en instalaciones permitidas. Eso puede ser a lo mejor el uso del gas natural de otros lugares que pueden, pues, típicamente lo usan. Entonces queremos hacer eso para que los procesos industriales se reduzcan.
Next slide, please. So the best available emissions approach would apply to existing permit facilities that exceed a threshold of 25,000 metric tons, and any new facilities that would be expected to reach that emissions.
Básicamente instalaciones con emisiones que cumplen o superan un nivel de tolerancia de 25,000 toneladas métricas, y también instalaciones nuevas que se esperan que alcance este umbral.
And I would just say, once again, the covered emissions for these sources, they do not include those fossil fuel combustion emissions, as I just mentioned, that DEQ will be regulating from the fossil fuel suppliers.
Y también quiero decir que las emisiones cubiertas en esas instalaciones no incluyen las emisiones de combustión de combustibles fósiles que DEQ ya regula a través de los proveedores de combustibles fósiles.
And the next slide here is just our next steps. Stephanie, I would say people can take a look at this. It's available on the website, but I will turn things back to you.
Y el siguiente diapositiva solamente son los pasos que vamos a tomar y ustedes pueden repasarlo. Entonces, Stephanie, ahora sigues tú.
Thank you. At this time, we will now take our first set of pre-registered commenters. I will share a screen briefly showing that first group, and then we will move into that first group. Each person has 2 minutes, please.
And this is Kathleen George again. I just want to share. It is normally my habit to try to welcome every single commenter and thank them for sharing their thoughts with us because we do value them so much. Just please understand, in the interest of hearing from as many people as possible, I'm going to simply do that now. I thank each and every one of you for sharing your time and your thoughts with us. We know some of that will be electronic, some of it will be in writing. It is tremendously important. And so I want to thank each and every one of you. And with that, I'm going to be quiet and listen to what you have to share with us. Thank you very much.
At this time, if Representative Pham would begin comment, please.
Thank you so much, everyone. My name is Con Pham, and I represent Oregon House District 46, including Northeast and Southeast Portland in the Oregon Legislature. I want to say first, thank you to the Environmental Quality Commission and DEQ for holding this hearing to get feedback on the draft climate protection program. And I also want to say that I'm so happy, given the broad interest in the program and that I've seen and how many people want to testify. I'm so happy that the commission has extended the public comment period so more Oregonians can weigh in on our collective climate future. As a legislator serving on the House Energy and Environment Committee, I am committed to working with DEQ to make sure that Oregon's climate protection program is a bold step forward for Oregon climate action. And while I am so appreciative of the incredible work that's gone into the climate protection program, I am concerned that it's not quite meeting the bar yet for adequate action to meet the climate crisis. Our state is still barely recovering from last year's unprecedented wildfires when we were hit with ice storms, 2 deadly heat waves, and another season of unprecedented wildfires. So based on what I've heard from a lot of constituents and other interested stakeholders, I just want to make sure that the goals of this program really meet what science tells us we need, and also what my constituents are expecting for Oregon to lead on climate. So I would summarize my concerns and recommendations into 3 main buckets. First, I just want to urge that the CPP align with the executive order's climate goals and also with its equity mandate. Secondly, I want to urge that the DEQ take out exemptions for the large polluters whose emissions won't be regulated under the CPP. My understanding is that there are, in the electricity sector, there are at least 7 remaining fracked gas power plants whose emissions won't be regulated. And those emissions, even if they're just exporting the power, those emissions still impact communities who are living around the plants. Which leads me to my third point. I think we need to be really careful about the rules for the Climate Community Investments Program. We can't just offset damage done to the health and safety of communities by placing it elsewhere. EJ communities, rural, low-income, BIPOC communities will continue to bear the brunt of pollution if we do not take pollutants out of the air. While I appreciate that you are using the higher social cost of carbon to price these offsets, the social costs of carbon are still understated, and we need to truly internalize all the myriad social costs of carbon into its price. So if we do use CCIs, I think it's important that we minimize these offsets as much as possible, and that the climate community investments have a clear path for directly investing in the communities that are being harmed. So as we seek to take the strongest actions possible, I know there are concerns about DEQ statutory authority, and just want to say that as a legislator, I'm committed to working to make sure that the legislature is clearing obstacles in your way. And working with the DEQ and EQC, I believe we can take actions needed to protect our state's climate and the health of our people. Thank you.
Thank you. Next commenter, Kathy Samson Cruz. Please begin.
Sheikh Pachwe, good day. My name is Oldwe Asux. I'm an enrolled Walulapum Band member of the Confederate Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. My English name is Cathy Samson Cruz. I'm a wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. My husband and I recently retired and love devoting our time between the mountains, the rivers, the ocean, and our family. I'm here to offer my time-limited 2-minute testimony, something so foreign to our tribal ways of allowing elders to speak their hearts and minds on such important issues that our very way of life and the future of all living beings as we know it. The current proposed Oregon Climate Protection Program is unjust and unfair in many ways. Yes, that's what I said, unjust and unfair. Many people have given EQC good testimony on several key issues. I will focus on what I see as a lack of government-to-government relationship as promised to tribal nations, tribal people, and the absence of any regulations of fracked gas power plants. There's nothing natural about these plants. In 1954, I was born in the rural town of Pendleton, Oregon. Our tribes traveled the Blue Mountains, the Umatilla Rivers, the Wild Horse Creek, the confluence of the Columbia River and the Snake, homelands of the Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla people. Treaty land upheld by our 1855 treaty with the US government. Unfortunately, we have seen constant exploitation of land, air, and water we hold sacred, where we gather our plants, berries, roots, medicine, we hunt and fish, and we carry on the old ceremony and prayers that have been given to us by the Creator. Do you understand the meaning of this? Have you taken into consideration the infringement of our tribal treaty rights and those of our neighboring tribes who are also affected? The Yakima, look at their, I see I'm going to get cut off, of course. What about brown and black families who live near the area of the 4 frac gas power plants near Hermiston? We have read the fine print and more people are informed and concerned, and we know the greed of Portland General Electric. They want to change their permit to allow a 7-fold increase in the smog forming pollution. We are not going to sit idly by. I'll put this in testimony in writing. Why am I not shocked that you are not even addressing this? Governor Kate Brown gave a clear mandate. Just do the job. Don't just get it done right. The rule needs to reflect stringent regulation of frac gas power plants. Protect the sacred, if not for my grandchildren, for your own. Kwalisam Chana, we are still here.
Thank you. Next is Stan Dean. Please begin.
I'm sorry, Stan, it looks like you're on mute.
Okay, yeah, my name is Stan Dean, and I am representing the Oregon Association of Conservation Districts. Our main concern is the exclusion of sequestration in natural and working lands from the CCI portion of the program, and we strongly urge that this be reversed. To address climate change, we need focus on reducing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which can be done by reducing emissions and sequestering. Tools to address both pathways are needed to do the best job possible. The CCI program will generate a large amount of revenue, and sequestration projects should have access to those funds. The program is intended to mitigate impacts of climate change to disproportionately affected communities. Sequestration projects would provide the best opportunity for mitigation in rural settings. Couple of more points. CCIs must have integrity. This means that they must be designed to achieve benefits that are real, verifiable, enforceable, and long-lived. The regulations don't do that. The Equity Advisory Committee should include representatives with expertise in the environment. Climate change has significant impacts on our natural resources, and the Advisory Committee should have that expertise. In closing, I want to recognize that the Oregon Global Warming Commission recently completed their natural and working lands proposal. This proposal specifically states that DEQ should solicit and fund projects that result in net carbon sequestration on natural and working lands, including but not limited to the use of CCIs. Thank you for the time to testify today.
Thank you. Next is Cathy Moey. Please begin.
This is Cathy Moey on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Oregon. The League has been following the CPP for over a year and has previously supported, along with many others, the DEQ's taking advantage of the "at least" in the governor's executive order to speed up emission reductions. We have also supported putting industrial sources back under the cap. We have concerns that will be explained in more detail in our written comments. Here are a few. The review period for the program should be reduced from 5 years to 3 years and be tied to the compliance period. DEQ should be authorized by these rules to make some changes, such as the cap for the natural gas companies, and to initiate rulemaking. Especially given the interest expressed by regulated sources in buying community climate investment credits, requiring CCIs to be 501c3 organizations is unnecessarily limiting, and others such as local governments and tribes should be allowed. DEQ could still establish constraints for the projects, such as requiring 1 metric ton of emissions reduction for each CCI. We believe the method of allocating compliance instruments, otherwise known as allowances, among the non-natural gas fuel suppliers does not adequately take into account whether actual reductions are being made in emissions. We are working with others to see if a better method can be developed. Thank you for this opportunity to testify before you. and we hope our comments will be useful in developing a successful program.
Thank you. Next is Casey Baig. Please begin.
Good evening. My name is Casey Baig, and I'm a father, a law student at Lewis and Clark Law School, as well as a project coordinator for Northwest Environmental Defense Center. You are in a unique position, EQC, as one of the first rulemaking bodies to address climate change since the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released their latest assessment report. I urge you to read the report, understand the distinct differences between 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees of warming, and ensure Oregon does its part to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. The report estimates that net zero emissions by 2050 sets us on a course between 1.5 and 1.8 degrees. In comparison, the proposed CPP cap sets a goal of only 80% emissions reductions by 2050. This goal does not align with the science, nor does it match the urgency of our neighbors in Washington, who just recently set a cap of 95% emissions reductions by 2050 and an additional 5% offset to reach their net zero goal. The Oregon legislature recently passed HB 2021, setting the goal of zero emissions by 2040. The CPP cap must match these goals. I advocate for a 50% reduction by 2030, 100% reduction by 2045 to match Oregon and Washington legislatures. While I do not speak on behalf of environmental justice communities, I choose to use my voice to advocate for a just transition as well. In their current form, the community climate investments with the CPP are at risk of not supporting those communities. Instead, I see a loophole that allows covered entities to create incestuous nonprofit arms that commandeer this process as a way to further fossil fuel combustion well into the future. Measures must be taken to ensure the CCI funding remains unavailable to entities who would hold a conflict of interest and favor fossil fuel combustion over the intended purposes of supporting disenfranchised communities and true greenhouse gas elimination. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Janet Lorenzen. And please begin.
Chair George and committee members, I'm Professor Janet Lorenzen with Willamette University and 350 Salem. I'm excited that Oregon will be requiring big companies who have externalized their emissions for decades and blocked climate policy to take greater responsibility. We need to follow through on the 2022 timeline. Starting the program as soon as possible should be an important element in your decision-making and not letting great be the enemy of good. Additionally, I would like to see stationary sources have an emissions target so the public can hold them accountable for meeting it. However, do not put them under the cap, which would give them access to offsets, which environmental justice groups do not want. Also, DEQ should lower the starting threshold for covered fuel suppliers from 200,000 to 25,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent, which is what it is in California and Washington state. Similarly, the emissions cap for the program should be science-based and 50% below 1990 levels by 2030. The definition of EJ communities is very broad because it comes from HB 2021, the 100% clean energy bill. You should consult the EJ task force about the definition or have 100% of CCIs go to environmental justice communities, and of that, at least 10% should go to tribes and 50% to communities of color. I want to second and agree with Kathy, Samson, Cruz in terms of DEQ needing to improve consultation with the 9 tribal governments in Oregon. Finally, only 15% of compliance credits should be allowed to go toward community climate investment offsets. I want this program to reduce harms to EJ communities and increase benefits, but we don't want the policy itself to create sacrifice zones that the CCIs then need to address. Thank you.
And thank you. Our next commenter is AbbyKrebsbach. Please begin.
Good afternoon, Chair George, Commissioners, and Director Whitman, excuse me. My name is AbbyKrebsbach. I'm the Environmental Director for Cascade Natural Gas. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comment today. We appreciate DEQ extending the comment period. Cascade and Avista, as rural natural gas suppliers in Eastern and Southern Oregon, jointly participated in the Cap and Reduce Rulemaking Advisory Committee. We thank DEQ for that opportunity. We offer safe, reliable, and affordable natural gas services in Oregon, and will continue to utilize these systems to deliver increasingly decarbonized energy to achieve cost-effective emission reductions. We'll be working to accelerate energy efficiency, ramp up renewable natural gas investments, and add hydrogen fuel. We thank DEQ staff for their participation in Public Utility Commission workshops and encourage continued engagement in the PUC process to ensure coordination of tools and resources. Robust and feasible compliance pathways are essential for energy reliability and resilience and will help avoid emissions leakage into non-regulated sectors. Based on modeling in the OPUC fact finding, it's clear that community climate investment credits will be critical for compliance, especially in the near term. DEQ should ensure credits are available at the outset and are cost comparable with traditional offset programs. Covered entities should be allowed to select and invest in projects that meet the needs of our rural communities and should be inclusive of carbon sequestration. Thank you again for this opportunity. We will also submit written comments.
Thank you. Next person in our list is Anne Meering. I believe I have the right line. Anne Meering, you may have been prompted to begin.
Okay. Yes, Chair George and members of the commission. My name is Anne Meyering. I'm a resident of rural Jackson County, and I'm here to testify for a stronger climate protection program. The first element of the program that needs to be strengthened is the DEQ's current target for reducing emissions. In order for the cap to reduce emission pollution fast enough, it needs to be based on the most current scientific information available, which is the information that was released recently from the IPCC. That report indicated that we need to be at net zero by 2030 in order to even have a 50% chance of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade. I understand that when the DEQ began developing the program rules, the IPCC report hadn't yet been released, but now we have that information, and the DEQ cap proposal needs to be in line with that information. And secondly, the program needs to include all polluters under the cap and reduce program. The threshold should be lowered to include more fossil fuel companies initially and at a faster rate in the coming years. Climate pollution resulting from extraction, transmission, and processing of all fossil fuels needs to be included, and stationary source polluters also need to be included. I appreciate all the work of all the parties involved in developing the climate protection program, and I also encourage the DEQ and the EQC to review closely the comments on the DEQ proposal submitted on behalf of Southern Oregon Climate Action Now. Thanks for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Next is Bob Juncke. Please begin.
Thank you, Chairman George and commissioners. My name is Robert Juncke, and I represent the Elders Climate Action, the Oregon chapter. I'm on the policy team at the National Elders Climate Action, and our comments here today reflect work that we're doing around the country. We're here today to support and expand upon the comments of Representative Pham and some of the other speakers who have already highlighted the importance of aligning this climate protection program with the science. We did bring to DEQ's attention back last December the IPCC report from 2018, which called for a 45% reduction in emissions by 2030 in order to protect the climate from exceeding 1.5 degrees above the historical background. That report was virtually ignored by DEQ. We got no response explaining why they developed a program that does not align with the science. What the science is telling us is that by 2030, we need to reduce emissions from their baseline by 15 million metric tons. And this program only reduces emissions by 7 million. metric tons. So it falls far short of what the science is telling us. And if this program is implemented, it will actually contribute to emissions that raise the temperature more than 2 degrees above background. What that means for Oregon is devastating. The climate assessment prepared by the scientists at OSU, make clear that we're facing the possibility of having at least a quarter of Oregon incinerated by wildfire if we allow the temperature to rise that much. We need stronger action, and we rely upon you to help get it from the DEQ. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Ali Dugan. Please begin.
Good evening, and thank you for listening to the many comments today. My name is Ali Dugan, and I've lived in Oregon for 3 years. I felt compelled to testify today because I know firsthand the impact that emissions have on public health. I grew up in Salt Lake City, which often boasts the worst air quality in the nation in the winter, and suffered from childhood asthma as a result. Luckily, I had access to healthcare and lived in an affluent neighborhood, which often reported better air quality than low-income communities located close to polluters. This same reality plays out in Oregon, and I'm saddened to see the DEQ hand over a proposal that fails to protect the health of Oregonians and specifically fails to protect BIPOC, lower income, rural, and other frontline communities. The failure is on 2 fronts. One, the proposal excludes many large stationary sources of emissions and allows for continued emission of dangerous co-pollutants that will mainly impact lower income and frontline communities. This outcome is not in line with DEQ's equity goals, nor is it an acceptable outcome for these communities that will continue to suffer. Second, the proposal will not result in the emission reductions necessary to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, again, failing communities as frontline communities as they will feel and have already felt the impact of climate change first and worst. The DEQ needs to provide a proposal that will meaningfully reduce emissions in line with IPCC targets in order to protect Oregonians. The current cap and trade reduced plan to regulate fossil fuel suppliers does not achieve the target reduction for the sector, and the CCI investment credit program does not have strong enough language to ensure community benefits from offset projects. The regulation of stationary sources will also not meet target reduction. The current exclusion of fracked gas power plants and other large sources, coupled with a plan to ask polluters for their best available reduction, renders this proposal ineffective. It is undeniable that climate change is here. It will be a threat to our health as Oregonians, and it will impact BIPOC and frontline communities most. I urge you to recommend that the DEQ go back to the drawing board and do the hard work of proposing rules that will meaningfully reduce emissions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Dr. Theodora Songas. And
good evening, Chair George, Commissioners, and Director Whitman. I'm Dr. Theodora Songas, an environmental health scientist. I'm commenting because of my great concern that the proposed climate protection program does very little to address the fossil fuel emissions responsible for the climate crisis, nor does it address the disproportionate burden on the health of children, the elderly, BIPOC, and other marginalized communities. Because of these failures of the proposal, I request that DEQ reverse course now before the rulemaking proceeds further and irreparable harm is allowed to continue. Oregon's top polluters, fracked gas power plants, are exempted. The emissions from these facilities are not only greenhouse gases, but include a toxic brew of co-pollutants that affect every human physiological system, causing a broad array of health problems. Rural, BIPOC, and frontline communities suffer more exposures, are more sensitive, and less prepared to adapt to these conditions. Research published this week in the journal Science demonstrates that with continued warming at the current trajectory, today's children will experience 3 times as many climate disasters as their grandparents. Disasters including wildfires and excessive heat incidents that we have already experienced in Oregon. The scientific basis for acting immediately to abate the current trajectory means that Oregon and DEQ must take more effective steps to require industry to radically reduce emissions. We have no other choice if we value the lives of our children and for them to have a possible viable future. This proposal must be revised immediately to effect real changes. Thank you for your work and for considering our concerns.
Thank you. Next will be Representative Valderrama. Please begin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Vanderrama. I represent House District 47, which covers Outer East Portland in the Oregon State Legislature. Thank you to the Environmental Quality Commission and DEQ staff for holding this hearing to get feedback on the draft climate protection program. It's so important, and I encourage the commission to extend the public comment period so that more Oregonians can weigh in on our climate future. It's very important that we get as much involvement as possible. As a state legislator serving on the House Energy and Environment Committee, I want to work with DEQ to ensure Oregon's climate protection program is a bold step forward for Oregon's climate action. I have some concerns and would like to work with DEQ and EQC to make necessary changes for the effectiveness of these draft rules. In my district, which is very residential and densely populated, residents feel the cost of climate change in their lungs and in their health outcomes. As we saw this summer, frequent and punishing extreme heat events are becoming the new normal due to climate change, but not all Portlanders are facing the heat within the same environment. Many parts of East Portland are in urban heat islands where factors like lack of trees and parks and concrete development have our neighborhoods up to 9 degrees hotter than the city average, 9 degrees that have spelled life or death for our residents here. So it's critical that Oregon's climate protection program addresses climate change and environmental injustices in a way that meets the pressing need for action and prevents greenhouse gases from being emitted into the atmosphere. I urge the EQC to set the most stringent standards and reduction targets as possible. Thank you so much for the time, and I look forward to continuing to work with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Representative Campos, and you may begin.
Thank you so much. My name is Wins Campos. I am the state representative for House District 28, and I serve on the Healthcare Committee in the Oregon Legislature. Thank you to the Environmental Quality Commission and DEQ staff for holding this hearing to get feedback on the draft climate protection program. I hope the EQC will continue to hold public comment opportunities so that Oregonians, particularly younger Oregonians like myself, have more opportunity to weigh in on our climate future. I represent parts of Beaverton and Aloha, Oregon. My district is extremely racially and socioeconomically diverse, including some of the highest numbers of Asian Pacific Islander and BIPOC communities in the state. My constituents are feeling the impacts of climate change every day, and we have been tasked to ensure Oregon takes the right steps to address the climate crisis. They're also looking for climate action that directly benefits environmental justice communities that are most directly impacted by pollution and fossil fuel infrastructure. I hope to represent their voices. I'm concerned that the proposed climate protection program does not require the swift reductions in Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions necessary to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And they do not prioritize emissions reduction strategies that protect the health and welfare of Oregon's environmental justice communities. DEQ should regulate emissions from the electric sector, or at the very least, close the loophole for exported and direct purchased power. Not regulating stationary sources that are currently harming the health and well-being of communities in Oregon is a missed opportunity to achieve equity in the program. Oregonians are looking for serious climate action, and as the youngest legislator in the Oregon House, I hear often from youth that fear the drastic effects on our environment. As a legislator, I am committed to working with DEQ to ensure the program achieves its goals for bold climate action and equity. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next is Representative Dexter. And please begin.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Maxine Dexter. I represent House District 33, which includes Northwest Portland and also includes the industrial waterfront in Northeast Washington County. I stand in firm partnership with DEQ, committed to doing what I am able to ensure this program achieves aggressive goals for bold climate action and equity. As a critical care and pulmonary, also known as lung physician, I have seen firsthand the effects of climate change on people's lives in the most personal and concerning ways as I care for them in clinic and in the hospital with acute exacerbations and progression of their lung disease. The science is clear. Climate change is an environmental issue and a serious threat to our public health. Asthma, COPD, and cardiovascular disease rates in urban areas have increased, and data suggests this is related to air pollution, including increased particulate matter. I represent a district which is documented to have the worst air quality in the state, and that is directly related to our upwind co-location with the critical energy infrastructure hub. As many here likely know, the CEI hub is a 6-mile stretch of industrial development along the west shore of the Willamette River. More than 90% of all liquid fuel in Oregon is stored there. It is very clear that the impacts of this reality disproportionately impact the BIPOC and low-income members of my community. My district also saw some of the highest numbers of heat-related deaths in the state last summer. The health impacts of the climate crisis are crystal clear and cannot be ignored. They demand urgent and unified action with a focus on protecting the health and safety of Oregonians. We cannot do this without eliminating our dependence on fossil fuels. To meet this climate moment, the greenhouse gas reduction goals must be increased and exemptions must be aggressively minimized. We have an opportunity here to follow the science and prioritize health over industry. We have an important opportunity with Oregon's climate protection program to incentivize shifting away from fossil fuel dependence and emission production now, and we must embrace it. The development of this program is an incredible opportunity to lead with Oregon values, centering our commitment to our people and our environment. My constituents and the people of Oregon have a right to clean air, and today I ask the DEQ and EQC to listen carefully to the comments from community members and environmental justice organizations. Please revise the climate protection program so it will deliver the desired results that Oregon demands and deserves. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Nora Apter. Please begin.
Thank you. My name is Nora Apter, and I'm the Climate Program Director for the Oregon Environmental Council. Like many others testifying, I have been pleased to participate in every stage of DEQ's extensive rulemaking and public engagement process, and I'm eager to see the EQC adopt the most ambitious climate protection program possible without delay. Since DEQ began this rulemaking, Oregon has unwantedly become the poster child for climate change, making international headlines for deadly and devastating climate-fueled heat waves, wildfires, and drought. These tragedies are a grim visualization of what scientific consensus has long concluded. We must aggressively cut the fossil fuel emissions, digging us deeper into climate catastrophe. It is unconscionable to continue jeopardizing the lives and livelihoods of Oregon workers, frontline communities, children, and grandchildren, just to preserve business as usual for oil companies and gas utilities. An ambitious climate protection program will create jobs, spur innovation, improve public health, and invest in our communities. I urge DEQ to maximize these benefits by making the following improvements to the rules. First, the cap must follow the best available science and cut emissions 50% by 2030. Concerningly, DEQ's proposed cap trajectory would reduce emissions in the covered sectors just 16% below 1990 levels by 2030. Second, DEQ must hold large industrial emitters accountable to mandatory declining emissions targets. The current rules could allow industrial emissions to increase and still be in compliance with the program. Finally, community climate investments must achieve timely one-to-one emissions reductions and guarantee meaningful investments in environmental justice communities. We are in the decisive decade for climate action, and the CPP is a crucial opportunity for Oregon to act. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I once again urge you to strengthen and adopt these rules this year.
Thank you. Next is James Freeman. Please begin.
Chair George, members of the commission, thank you for this opportunity to comment. My name is James Freeman, and I represent the Oregon chapter of the Sierra Club, Oregon's largest long-standing grassroots environmental organization, representing nearly 75,000 members and supporters. We encourage DEQ and the EQC to design a program that is fully and completely lives up to the name Climate Protection Program. The recent Clean Energy Bill, House Bill 2021, does not cover a significant portion of Oregon's electricity generation sector, including facilities that use fracked natural gas to produce power. It is a major flaw in DEQ's program to exempt fracked gas polluters from the Climate Protection Program. We ask DEQ to immediately identify which facilities within the electricity generation sector remain unregulated by House Bill 2021 and include them in the Climate Protection Program. DEQ has the legal authority to do this, and it should be accomplished under the current rule proposal. It is unacceptable to leave these facilities exempt from state regulation and greenhouse gas reduction. The governor's executive order directed DEQ to cap and reduce greenhouse gas emission from large permitted industries. Instead, DEQ has proposed a technology-based best achievable emission reduction, or BEAR approach, that seems overly complicated and subject to interpretation, requires no clear and specific emission reduction outcome, and engenders mistrust of the DEQ, the progress, and the outcome. In fact, DEQ's own analysis admits that some facilities may not be required to do anything beyond what they are already doing. There are many flaws in the BEAR approach. Chief among them is that BEAR allows a polluter to do its own analysis and convince DEQ that nothing more can be done to reduce emissions. That is not a credible approach and is absolutely contrary to the governor's executive order. We support the community climate investment concept, and it must be carefully designed to deliver real, verifiable, multi-pollutant emission reductions that directly benefit the health and environmental justice communities in Oregon. DEQ's rule should explicitly give the highest priority to CCI projects that provide pollutant emission reductions that directly benefit environmental justice communities. In closing, we ask you to take action now. It is vital that EQC adopts the Climate Protection Program with the improvements suggested by stakeholders. Thank you for this opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Next is Leonard Barrett. If you'd please begin. If Leonard Barrett could please begin. Unfortunately, we cannot hear you at this time.
How about now? It says I'm unmuted.
Thank you. Yes, please begin. Leonard, I apologize. You have remuted it. I believe it's connected to your video channel. Let's see if, can we hear you now?
Yeah, that seems to be working. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Please begin.
Okay. My apologies. Hi, my name is Leonard Barrett. I'm here primarily because I'm a parent to a 5-year-old and a 13-year-old who will have to contend with the successes or failures of carbon regulation long after I'm gone. All of the climate reports start to run together, but there was one line in the August IPCC report that really struck me. In their best case scenario, climate warming is locked in for the next 3 decades. So if we pull out all the stops, temperatures peak mid-century, and that was impactful because 2050 is precisely when my daughter, currently a kindergartner, will be my age. So under the best case scenario, kindergarten to 35 for her will be marked by hotter summers, larger wildfires, more violent storms, and waves of humanitarian crises directly and indirectly caused by an increasingly unstable climate. And when she's my age, if we've done everything right at every opportunity, she and the rest of her generation and those to come might get to feel that there are better days ahead. And that's the best case scenario if we pull out all the stops. I appreciate the spirit of the Climate Protection Program, but it does not yet pull out all of the stops, and we owe it to today's youth and future generations to make this the boldest climate protection program possible. The following changes would help. Implement caps in line with the best available science by requiring emission reduction targets of 50% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. Hold large industrial sources accountable to mandatory declining emissions reductions. And with respect to the Community Climate Investments Program, include reporting and enforcement mechanisms that result in verifiable one-to-one carbon reductions and rules to ensure that these investments benefit the Oregonians who have been most harmed by environmental justice. I appreciate the opportunity to share these comments and look forward to the implementation and robust enforcement of a bolder climate protection program. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Ira Cuello Martinez, and please begin.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment today. My name is Ira Cuello Martinez, and I'm a resident of Northeast Salem. My parents came to this city as migrant farm workers over 27 years ago, and we have enjoyed living here ever since. Growing up, traveling from farm to farm, I distinctly remember seeing a tall red and white circular tower where I noticed a lot of gas come out of. It wasn't until high school that I learned about the Covanta trash incinerator. As I grew older, I began to understand the effects that these types of facilities have on our communities. The pollution emitted by these facilities greatly impacts the quality of air in surrounding areas. For instance, many of my friends growing up had asthma, and I witnessed the difficulty they had in breathing when playing outside. Although I cannot directly link Covanta to causing my friends to have asthma, I know that their pollution contributes to the bad air quality experienced in Salem, Brooks, and Woodburn. I was further concerned about the lack of regulation that Covanta faces and recognize that there are other polluters across the state that cause further harm to the environment and the communities that live nearby. That is why I'm eager to see the EQC adopt the most ambitious climate protection program possible by the end of this year. I asked the DEQ to make the following improvements to the final rules. First, the CPP must follow the best available science and aim to cut covered emissions in half by 2030, as many other folks have stated earlier today. Stronger and steeper emission reduction targets are needed to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Second, I'm extremely concerned that DEQ is proposing a program that could let large industrial polluters off the hook. I urge you to hold these facilities accountable with firm deadlines for pollution reduction that tracks science-based targets. And lastly, DEQ needs to strengthen the Community Climate Investments Program. This program must be first and foremost about community, ensuring that if a polluter chooses not to meet its compliance obligation by reducing emissions, that BIPOC and low-income rural communities in Oregon benefit from the investment intended to offset the pollution. But at present, the CCI program does not contain sufficient sideboards to accomplish this goal. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Next is Catherine Thomason, and please begin.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to comment today. My name is Dr. Catherine Thomason, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Environmental Caucus of the Democratic Party of Oregon. I am petrified with the health impacts of climate change that is already killing people with heat domes and now with toxic algae blooms occurring even in the Columbia River. That is why our team has contributed to prior comments on the DEQ Climate Protection Program, and we're here today. It is imperative to move the CPP forward this year. Let's get this cap and reduce program in place for fuels, including and especially natural gas, that when leaked is 86 times as potent a greenhouse gas compared to carbon dioxide. Oregonians want regulation on climate change, as a recent poll discovered. With regulation comes innovation. Our team will work hard to advocate for policies to allow fuel switching to those that are produced renewably. I urge DEQ to maximize these benefits in the following ways. First, the program must meet targets that cut covered emissions in half by 2030. To achieve this, more fuel companies must be under the cap sooner than the current plan requires. The industrial program, with its BEAR system, must have initial plan deadlines within 6 months. These companies have known the writing is on the wall, and they should be prepared. And their plan revisions should be due every 2 years, showing emissions reductions. Additional industrial entities must be placed on this track or under the cap expeditiously. Finally, I'm pleased DEQ has limited the amount of offsets purchase allowable and I encourage a set percentage of the investments targeted to protect impacted communities. Thank you for your concern and service on this commission.
Thank you. Next is Haley Case Scott, and please begin.
Chair George and members of the Environmental Quality Commission, my name is Haley Case Scott, and I'm a member of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, and I'm speaking today in my capacity as a climate justice grassroots organizer with Beyond Toxics and as a resident of Springfield, Oregon. I'm also speaking from my experience as a member of the Climate Protection Program Rulemaking Advisory Committee, which included a handful of members who work and serve environmental justice in impacted communities. Although DEQ staff made efforts to provide space for these voices, I do not believe that EJ voices were heard nor respected in the development of the draft rules. At the very beginning of this rulemaking period, DEQ staff identified a few goals, including setting limits on greenhouse gas emissions and prioritizing equity by promoting benefits and alleviating burdens for EJ and impacted communities. The current CPP rules fall short in meeting both of those goals. Rather than reducing emissions and burdens on impacted communities, the draft rules allow some of the biggest polluters to continue emitting greenhouse gas emissions, even though we know that Black, Indigenous, people of color, Native American communities, and other marginalized groups are fraught with decades, if not centuries, of disenfranchisement, disinvestment, and displacement, and have to bear the burden of greenhouse gas emissions and their co-pollutants. Environmental justice should be Oregon DEQ's top priority, and not allowing fracked gas polluters to avoid costs and inefficiencies. I'm also concerned that the proposed community climate investments will allow pollution to persist unabated in communities. It is not clear in the rules whether these investments will be equitably distributed amongst polluted and impacted communities that need it most. Please revise the rules to provide assurances that these projects will result in meaningful, timely emissions reductions and that investments will be guaranteed in communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. DEQ's mission is to be a leader in restoring, maintaining, and enhancing the quality of Oregon's air, land, and water, and I do not believe that the CPP draft rules reflect that mission. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next is Kellen Belcher, and please begin.
Thank you. My name is Kellen Belcher, and I'm a senior analyst on the Environmental Defense Fund's U.S. climate team. I'm here today on behalf of EDF's thousands of members in Oregon who want swift, ambitious, equitable, and effective climate policy. From the beginning of EDF's engagement on the Climate Protection Program, we have made it clear that our core goal is a program that will maximize emissions reductions, create equitable outcomes for environmental justice communities, and put Oregon on track to meet or exceed its climate goals. But the proposed regulatory language falls far short of what's needed to ensure that Oregon meets its current emission reduction goals, let alone the increasing ambition that science tells us is necessary to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. The proposed rules fail to place a firm limit on all major sources of climate pollution. They exempt the industrial sector and natural gas electricity exports from a firm declining cap on emissions. And the program's primary mechanism for promoting equity, community climate investments, are an insufficient, uncertain, and variable funding source that creates a false choice between community investments and climate ambition. Community climate investments also lack sufficient guardrails for both the environmental integrity of emissions reductions and for ensuring that environmental justice communities will receive substantial and meaningful benefits. The next decade is critical for climate action. We urge DEQ to strengthen the proposed rules and create the most ambitious climate protection program possible and exhibit true climate leadership by delivering a 50% reduction in climate pollution by 2030. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Next is Diane Meisenhelter. If you would please begin. And I apologize, Diane, I will prompt you to ask to unmute. Diane Meisenhelter is our next speaker. Thank you.
Diane Meisenhelter, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry. Diane Meisenhelter, Extinction Rebellion PDX Action Team. According to the International Panel on Climate Change, especially with the rapid acceleration of climate chaos, we need to be reducing emissions by at least 10% annually. In this critical decade, there needs to be stronger actual emission reduction goals with concrete steps required on an annual basis instead of faraway target dates. Compliant instrument reserves should not roll over. This plan is totally insufficient and not deserving of the name Climate Protection Program, as it would only target 40% of state emissions by exempting 6 major gas-powered plants and 43 large stationary sites. The former account for half of Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions from stationary sources, producing 9 million tons of CO2 equivalent annually. The rule should apply to all stationary sources, and the initial threshold should be set at 25,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent, as in Washington and California. The rule should include emissions from biofuels, biomass, RNG, and other source sites as well. In keeping with DEQ's equity goals, there should be no community sacrifice zones, ignoring the effects on frontline community areas near many of these large stationary sites in Columbia, Umatilla, Klamath, and Morrow counties. CCI sets should be spent to help address the impacts to these marginalized frontline communities. The rule should not exclude entities with interstate pipelines. The rule should also address significant emissions and leakages that occur in the production, processing, and transportation of these fuels, including fracked natural gas, not to mention cancer-causing and smog-forming VOCs, all of which are threats to our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. The last person in our initial pre-registered comment block is Nora Lehman. And if you would please begin.
Hi, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, super. Okay, thanks. Hi, my name is Nora Lehman, and tonight I'm speaking on behalf of my 2 children, who are 3 and 5, because we know that aggressively reducing emissions this decade is absolutely critical. In 10 years, when Sally and Sydney are 13 and 15, I pray we'll look at this moment as the turning point, when we wrestled back the possibility of a livable future against all the odds. I hate all the things climate change has already brought to the Pacific Northwest that my kids simply accept as normal, that there are days in the summer when it's literally too hot to play outside, that they have been sensitized to even a whiff of smoke in the air and will ask me to check the air quality index, and that having to tape up the leaky windows in our old house or flee Portland in a desperate search of somewhere, anywhere with decent air quality is now just a regular event for them. But as they're grown up, I'm well aware that these things are not our new normal, but are merely a preview of coming attractions. So while I'm grateful for the tremendous amount of work that has gone into these draft rules for the CPP, there are several critical defects that I'm asking you to remedy. Right now, this plan only requires polluters to reduce their emissions 2 to 3% per year. This isn't acceptable. I want to tell my kids that the CPP will follow the actual demands of physics and require at least 7% annual reductions in the next decade. Right now, the largest climate polluters in the state are not covered by the cap. This emission is impossible to explain to children in a way that makes any sense. And right now, the community climate investments don't require verifiable emissions reductions, so there's no guarantee that companies will reduce their pollution or invest in environmental justice communities. And kids can see that this isn't right. But if these problems are fixed, the Climate Protection Program will be truly worthy of its name. And I will be proud to tell my kids that we live in a state that is leading the way towards a cleaner, cooler, fairer future. Thank you very much for taking my comment.
Thank you. Chair George, this is Stephanie Caldera, the Commission Assistant. We have reached the end of the pre-registration list for comment block 1. We have also reached 5:30 p.m., previously noted as a potential time for a break. Recognizing that others may want to present comment later, and we do have additional pre-registered commenters. Chair George, would you like the Commission to take a break? The other comment block begins at 5:45 p.m.
So I want to check in with the director and our other commissioners on this. I do not want to be overburdensome. There are times when human beings simply need a break. And at the same time, we know we have many commenters who want to speak to us. So I'm going to open this up to the will of the group and give you guys an opportunity to provide me some feedback on this.
So this is Commissioner Kyle. I could use a break. It doesn't need to be the full 15 minutes though, if we want to shorten it.
And like I'm fine with a very curtailed break too.
All right, I think that sounds like a good idea. So let's take a break and let's be back in 5 minutes. My clock makes that 5:36. So a quick break. We'll see you then.
And thank you, Chair George. The commission will recess until approximately 5:36 p.m., after which we will check in regarding potential signups for additional commenters, and also noting we have a pre-scheduled pre-registered comment block at 5:45. I will pause the recording at this time. Thank you. Chair George, commissioners, attendees, at this time, Chair George, we do have a pre-registered comment block scheduled to begin at 5:45 p.m. And we had previously indicated the ability to sign up to present comment during this hearing. At your discretion, Chair George, we could take some of these same day signups prior to the 5:45 p.m. comment block, or I believe we could move to the 5:45 comments block for pre-registered commenters and then return following those to see what comments could be taken before the 7 p.m. end this evening. So Chair George, at your discretion and at those of your commissioners, please let me know how you would like to best proceed.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. Unless anybody objects, if the pre-registered commenters are present and are ready to speak, I would offer that and giving them the opportunity to do that now. I just want to say it doesn't mean that you will lose that opportunity per se. We understand that there could be people who are very focused on a time after 5:45, but if they are on board and would like to go ahead and speak now, I would welcome them to do that.
Thank you, Chair George. I do see several of the folks listed on this list for the pre-registration present. So at this time, I would ask if John Hillock is present to please click the raise hand button, or if connected by telephone, press *9. So I may bring you in for comment at this time. And thank you. John Hillock, it looks as though your audio and your video are in different, on different channels. So I ask if you are listening by phone, that perhaps you also press *9 so I can find that phone line. I cannot bring in your audio, but I will prompt you to start your video, and perhaps we can go from there. And Chair George, just as we work out these technical sort of difficulties, I am going to look down our list and ask that Stuart Leibowitz, if connected by telephone, please press *9 on your telephone line so I may advance you to present comment. I believe, great. So Stuart Leibowitz, if you would please begin. You should now be able to present comment.
Thank you. My name is Stuart Leibowitz, board member of the Douglas County Global Warming Coalition, an all-volunteer organization representing 450 residents in our community that has worked on climate change for 18 years. With an imminent and catastrophic climate crisis facing us, it is clear this must be in the forefront of any decision reached by the EQC. The executive order wisely mandated at least an 80% reduction in emissions below 1990 levels by 2050, consistent with the best science. Instead, DEQ bases its emissions reductions on 2017-2019 levels, guaranteeing they will fall far short of the 1990 mandate. If 2017-2019 is used, the percentage of emissions reductions required must be increased sufficiently to match the goal of 1990 levels. The executive order mandates that all polluters cap and reduce their emissions over time, but DEQ eliminated the cap for stationary sources. Instead, polluters can employ what they consider the best technology available, whether it reduces emissions or not. This
1 minute remaining.
That can actually increase emissions. All pollution must be subject to a cap and reduction over time, including that from stationary sources as was prudently mandated. Finally, we are deeply concerned that DEQ is not covering all the polluters they are legally entitled to. Given the extraordinary urgency of the moment, we must push the legal envelope as far as possible. Let's not look for reasons not to control emissions. After 30 years of working on climate crisis, the hope I felt from the executive order is turning to despair. We turn to you for bold leadership on climate change. Please, if not for my generation, then for my children, and most of all, my grandchild beginning her first term at OSU, give her the future that she deserves. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is John Hillock. And please begin. And John Hillock, at this time, you should be prompted to begin your comment.
Can you hear me now?
Thank you very much. Yes, please begin.
This is John Hillock, Wallowa County Commissioner. Tonight I'm representing the Eastern Oregon Commissioners Association. Allowing carbon sequestration products in the CCI program will broaden the scope of the program and likely provide significant benefits to the rural and low-income areas of the states, as well as tribal lands. The RAC meetings have clearly identified a pathway for such innovations. As written, the plan is unfair and unjust to rural communities as well as our tribes. The Oregon Global Warming Commission met on June 4, 2021 to discuss carbon reduction opportunities, and the meeting materials can be found on their website. Many organizations presented, providing guidance to the commission on opportunities to realize additional carbon emission reductions through incentivizing different land practices, modifying land management, avoiding conversion of natural and working lands, reforestation and restoration. The Nature Conservancy and Portland State University projected in their presentation to the Global Warming Commission the potential emission reductions that could be achieved by 2050 was in the range of 9.5 million metric tons per year. Incentives are needed for these reductions, making them a great fit for the CCI program. Please consider including working in natural lands in your climate solution plan. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, our next speaker is Beth Genley. And if you are prepared, Beth, please do begin.
One moment. I have to bring up my speech. There we go. My name is Elizabeth Genley. I live in Forest Grove, and I am a member of the Washington County chapter of 350.org. I support the Climate Protection Program and call for further strengthening the draft rules. Protect Oregonians by following the best science. We must cut our climate pollution by at least 50% by 2030. Don't give any polluters a free pass. Hold all large industrial sources accountable to mandatory declining emissions reductions. Invest in projects that result in real, verifiable pollution reductions that benefit Oregonians most harmed by fossil fuels and climate change. More specifically, to result in actual reductions, the emissions cap trajectory must, at minimum, achieve a 50% reduction by 2030. Calculate this reduction with 1990 total emissions as the baseline. Do not allow cap creep by using 2017 to 19 emissions as the baseline. Require CCIs to result in a 1-to-1 overall reduction of climate pollution or co-pollutants. Ensure that the price of CCIs reflect the real costs of community project implementation. Include all stationary sources of greenhouse gases, not accepting natural gas power plants in the cap requirements. I support requiring DEQ review of the CCIs at 2-year intervals. For each 2-year review, require polluters to hire qualified third-party auditors to specify how they will reduce their emissions on a timeline meeting the urgency of the crisis and our state's overall climate targets. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Tim Miller. If you'd please begin.
Thank you and good evening. My name is Tim Miller and I'm the Director of Oregon Business for Climate. We are nearly 100 businesses and 30,000 employees in Oregon. Our members agree that aggressive, equitable action on climate change is both an imperative and an opportunity for our state. I'm pleased to have been a member of the RAC and attended all the workshops and meetings and dozens of side meetings to understand this important program, and I applaud the work. I looked back at my calendar on this and it goes back 15 months, including workshops and public meetings and hearings. So any covered entities saying it's been too fast and that we should delay implementation are simply not correct. The program represents essential climate action that is both needed and can spur our state's leadership and the resulting opportunities. We realize you're not the legislature and that you don't have all the tools to solve all of our climate challenges. At the same time, you've heard a lot of powerful testimony urging that this program be as strong as possible. To that end, I offer 3 key improvements as you work with DEQ to make this program as effective as it can be. First, regarding the overall goal, new alarming science arrived in August after this design began, and the declining cap needs to be accelerated accordingly. Second, regarding stationary sources, the bare approach by itself is not enough. We also have to establish specific targets to motivate innovation, spur opportunity, and achieve the emissions reductions we need. Third, on community climate investments, please ensure the program is clear, can ramp effectively, and not only may, but shall meet the needs of our impacted communities and our environment. Again, please accelerate the overall emissions reductions, set targets for stationary sources, and clarify the CCI program requirements. Most importantly, while making the program as strong as possible, please approve it on the current timeline. Thanks very much for the chance to speak with you.
Thank you. Next is Virginia Tarango. If you would please begin.
Hello, my name is Virginia Tarango. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to offer testimony related to DEQ's proposed climate protection program. While I have multiple concerns about the proposed rules, I will focus my comments on the rules as they pertain to the greenhouse gas emissions from stationary sources. It is critical that the rules establish clear and specific emission reduction goals for stationary sources. These goals should be based on impacts experienced by communities near these facilities. The use of the declining cap to create these reduction goals makes sense. We cannot forget that the health of community members, those individuals and families that cannot afford to simply move away from these pollution sources depends on sound and strong rulemaking. It is the reason so many of us call for environmental justice considerations to be prioritized and used in setting the emission limits. I also urge DEQ to expand the number of stationary sources that would be required to comply with the emission reduction goals. Overall, the plan falls short in some areas in meeting, but definitely in meeting Governor Brown's emission reduction directive. I will conclude by asking DEQ to make necessary changes to these rules to ensure we meet Oregon's goals, an 80% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from the 1990 levels by the year 2050. Thank you.
Thank you. If Patty Hine is present, you are the next in our list. Please press the raise hand button in your participants and reactions panel. Or if you are connected by phone, please press *9. That will show me that you are present. While Patty Hine takes that action, I would ask that our next speaker, Jason Cole, begin.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak. I was born and raised in Southern Oregon, and I'm concerned about our future. Not because of climate change or the conceived notion that mankind controls the climate, but because of irrational government interference with the reliable energy that Oregonians need, especially in colder climates and remote areas. You're asking us to ramp up consumption of alternative fuels like biodiesel and renewable diesel, which has very limited supply even. It's almost unavailable. Neither of these products winterize well and will leave motorists and emergency vehicles stranded in the winter due to gelling and just, cold temperature problems. The actual loss of life and harm that that could be the result of this could be significant. If the goal here is human flourishing and well-being, then we need to consider how reliable the energy that you plan on replacing with this proven energy we use today, what are we really going to replace it with? Is it when the wind blows or when the sun shines? What's the plan here? There really isn't one. And in closing, CCI purchasers need to be able to designate where their credits go in their communities. As it stands, any regulated entity or related entity, as stated in 340-271-0910, or a contractor may not receive CCI funds or have anything to do with them. So essentially, you're barring people that today produce energy and services to the public from having any input on how to continue to do that and serve these communities. We need to have a way to halt the program when compliance is not possible or feasible, or especially affordable for Oregon's low-income families, possibly capped at an equal amount of 2 cents per gallon of gasoline.
Thank you.
I would also like everyone that has or is speaking in support of this proposed ruling, please go home and turn off your natural gas to your home. Immediately sell any combustion you have. Quit wearing anything with polyester or synthetic fabric. No longer use anything with ingredients made from petroleum, like
Thank
trash,
you for your comments. We do
plastic
need to move on.
containers, life support equipment, prosthetics, cosmetics, tires.
Thank you very much for your
or anything that has been brought to market by petroleum, which is probably 90% of everything within your eyesight right now. And
Thank you, Jason Cole. At this time, we will move on to the next speaker, who is Lori Powell. Thank you.
Good evening.
Lori Powell, you may begin.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Lori Powell. I'm a research associate professor at the University of Oregon, and I'm here in solidarity with other climate activists on behalf of our state, nation, and planet. I invite you to consider the expression whack-a-mole, quote, a situation in which problems continue to arise faster than one is able to solve or cope with them, resulting in piecemeal, incomplete, or temporary results. Yes, the Pacific Connector, Jordan Cove fracked gas energy projects are not going to happen thanks to DEQ, EQC, and the tireless efforts of hundreds of advocates. It's amazing. But while we've whacked that mole, another pops up. Our state's piecemeal and incomplete plan for regulating greenhouse gas emissions among Oregon's existing fracked gas plants. Exempting these plants from regulations puts in harm's way the communities that live nearby and is utterly inconsistent with having stopped the Jordan Cove projects in their tracks. Speaking of inconsistencies, legal expert James Gustav Speth has masterfully chronicled in his book titled They Knew, the US federal government's 50-year role in causing the climate crisis, how Democratic and Republican administrations alike have known about and with great passion have expressed their deep concern about the rapidly increasing dangers of climate disruption, and yet have continued to actively support the fossil fuel industry. So how is the decision to exempt Oregon's fracked gas plants from emissions regulations any different than what the federal government has done? Please support aggressively regulating greenhouse gas emissions among Oregon's top climate polluters, all fracked gas power plants. Thank you so much.
Thank you. At this time, we will return back to commenter Patty Hine, I believe is under the display name of 350 Eugene, and please begin.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. My name is Patricia Hine. I have lived rurally for the past 20 years outside of Eugene in Lane County. Thank you for this opportunity to comment. I'm a retired U.S. Navy commander and proudly served my country and my community. And like you, I have been in the position of having the safety and well-being of other people as my sole responsibility. Your mission is to protect the environmental quality of Oregonians for generations to come, while meeting Governor Brown's order to cap and reduce greenhouse gas emissions from fuel suppliers and large stationary sources. As it is currently drafted, the plan will fail to hit the targets of Governor Brown's order. I wasn't really allowed to make plans that failed. More importantly, it will not cause the immediate, rapid, large-scale reduction to avoid catastrophic and irreversible global warming. Oregon's electric utilities are regulated by HB 2021, but fossil gas power plants are not covered. The managed decline of a cap is not steep enough, and you are missing many emissions by giving a pass to smaller polluters. We have all come to understand that stopping the emissions from methane gas is the quickest way to buy more time to deal with the other longer lasting pollutants. We need that time. Scientists say we will blow past the 1.5 degrees of heating promised by the Paris Agreement. And scientists also say disruptions and discontinuity of the climate as we have known it will follow. Research shows that every 1/10 of a degree of warming we can avoid helps reduce the destruction. As responsible public leaders, you have the responsibility to fully meet the mandates of the governor's order. In closing, while there are multiple complex issues in military, the standards we upheld were to guarantee equal treatment of service members because everyone is valuable and no one should be left behind. Our climate policy should do the same and include our frontline neighbors and not allow them to have sacrifice zones. Thank you for doing your job.
Thank you. If Wilson Smith is connected to the call, please use the raise hand function in the reactions panel or press *9 if connected by phone. At this time, we will move to the next commenter, Danny Caller, and please begin.
Hi, thank you for this time. I'd like to read a tweet from Governor Brown This was back during the ice storms that we all experienced last year. Last night, weather continued to create widespread outages with more than 330,000 Oregonians without power as of this morning. Utility crews are making progress, but the weather is causing outages faster than the pace of restoration, especially in the Tri-County area. So what I'd like to say is that Oregons want affordable energy choices that include natural gas, and this proposal is also an attack on energy choice. A lot of people prefer natural gas for heating their homes, for hot water, for cooking. People prefer natural gas because it's reliable and it's affordable. When a winter storm makes power go out, natural gas fireplaces and propane barbecues you're able to cook on, the fireplaces you can heat your homes with. These rules will result in significant fuel cost increases for all Oregonians. Reducing access to natural gas will also reduce consumer choice, negatively impact my business, and result in higher prices and lost jobs. We all really support clean energy, but electrification is not the same as decarbonization. When we transitioned our electric grid to more wind and solar instead of coal, we didn't tear down all of our power lines, nor should we remove natural gas infrastructure. With recent advancements in technology, renewable natural gas and green hydrogen will be able to flow through these same exact systems. But reducing access to natural gas will stifle these innovations and de-incentivize utility investments in clean, decarbonized energy solution. We just urge the DEQ to have a fair process and consider all sides when developing these rules. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Mary Staub. If you would please begin.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Good
Mary.
evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak and for the extension on the ability to comment. My name is Mary Staub, and I'm a fourth generation family business owner, as someone who was born and raised in the great state of Oregon, and who is also deeply concerned for its future. Growing up in the town of Lakeview in the southeastern portion of the state, I watched my family pour everything that they had into the business and the communities that they loved. My cousins, as well as my brother and I, are now doing the same. We feel like each individual that we serve, each person that we employ, and each community relationship we grow is part of a family. That said, it is in defense of each of these that I feel the need to address this rule and ask for reconsideration of its implementation. Preserving the environment and the beauty that is Oregon is something we can all agree is a priority. The problem comes with the methodology proposed in the greenhouse gas emission rule of 2021. We have no alternative fuel source or the infrastructure to procure such. We have transportation and fuel providers within the state are already leaders in reducing greenhouse gases through the Clean Fuels program. Unlike the Clean Fuels program, the current proposed regulation does not monitor the price of compliance and suspend the program when the price to comply gets too high. There is no protection here for the Oregon consumer or the Oregon business owner. As mentioned previously, I would like to stress that many fuel jobbers in Oregon are in fact family-owned businesses. We provide scholarships, invest in our youth programs, and invest in solutions for the future at the community and state level. We're vital to the communities that we serve, both from an operational and economic standpoint. Fuel rationing is a concern that comes to mind. When we can no longer meet increasing requirements for emissions, biofuels will increase in demand, supply will decrease, and CCI credits will only cover 20% of this requirement. Affordable and available transportation fuels is an equity issue. We cannot simply outprice certain people from fuel or only offer fuel to those that have the most money. Fuel should be available to Oregonians across the state. To ensure that happens, the rule needs a mechanism to suspend the program when the cost of compliance exceeds 2 cents a gallon or any fuel rationing is required. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Diane Hodiak.
Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity to speak, Chair George and the commissioners. At a time when science says we need to be at least at a 50% reduction in fossil fuels by 2030, DEQ is allowing excessive use of renewable natural gas or RNG. Despite the disinformation being circulated, RNG is a dirty, toxic fuel. It is methane similar to fossil natural gas with 84 times more global warming potential than carbon dioxide over 20 years. It has limited application and supply. Experts feel that due to the significant cost of getting RNG from many sources, it will also be expensive. RNG should have limited use, not be used in buildings where electrification is easier, cheaper, and more available. Additionally, all fugitive fossil fuel gas and RNG leaks should be required to be fixed in order to qualify for and maintain a permit. The Environmental Defense Fund estimates that leaks account for about 2.3% of the total gas. Federal pipelines cannot be regulated legally, but local pipelines can. Currently, only leaks that qualify as unsafe are fixed at the cost of the customer. I submit that fossil gas explosions can occur when leaks are present. Deadly RNG has proved unsafe for transport as well. DEQ must require all leaks to be fixed in local pipelines. The International Energy Agency has determined that this could be done at no net cost to industry. DEQ should minimize the use of RNG to those sources that are difficult to electrify and confine its use to about 10% of total fossil gas, which is the level recommended in the Northwest Power Plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next commenter is Alice Shapiro.
Hello, this is Alice Shapiro, and I have been active in the environmental movement for many years, and I'm an elder now, but I continue to work in the movement with younger people as well as my contemporaries. This evening, due to limited time, I will address my concern that OHSU is excluded from regulation as one of the stationary sources of pollution. According to an article in OHSU News on January 13th of this year, healthcare is responsible for a staggering 10% of carbon emissions in the US. And an NIH study published in 2016 stated that the US healthcare sector is highly interconnected with industrial activities that emit much of the nation's pollution to air, water, and soils. This study further states that emissions which are directly and indirectly attributable to the healthcare sector pose potential harmful effects to public health. Hospitals produce 29 pounds of waste per day, and anesthetic gases used daily are also greenhouse gases. They have a major atmospheric effect that contribute to ozone depletion and greenhouse gas warming. I live now in a senior community where several hundred other seniors live just at the base of Markham Hill, the location of OHSU. Many of us, including myself, rely upon the competent health care we receive from this facility. However, in order to fully protect our health and the health of all of our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, the DEQ must regulate this and other stationary polluters, no matter how small or how large, and OHSU must conform. Our whole world, not just my community and not just my family, is at stake. So please, as you are public servants, please do your job. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If Jamie Raylander is connected by Zoom platform, please use the raise hand function so I may connect you. If you are connected by phone, please press *9. And at this time, our next commenter is Michael Mitten. Please begin.
Thank you, Chair George and members of the commission. My name is Michael Mitten. I am a member of the steering committee for Metro Climate Action Team, sponsored by the OLCV. The climate crisis is now the overarching global threat and will ultimately determine our success as a functioning society. The draft rule is the start, but it needs more and needs to be more ambitious in order to confront the looming crisis we all face. At the extreme cost of climate inaction has never been more clear. This summer's climate-fueled extreme heat, widespread drought, early fire season are just the latest examples of how climate change is aggravating public health and already costing Oregon taxpayers billions of dollars. And the crisis will only get worse unless we act strongly now. After dozens of workshops and hearings over the past year and a half, no further delays seem to be warranted. The draft rule needs to be strengthened in three following areas. A more stringent cap is the first. Given that the climate impacts are already costing Oregonians billions and future costs will be even greater, the DEQ must enact targets in line with the best available science, which requires emissions reductions of 50% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. Second, mandatory requirements for large industrial sources. These entities need to be held to mandatory long-term emissions reductions. Third, and finally, strengthen the community climate investment process. We commend the DEQ for proposing community climate investments, as it is the principal mechanism to provide both equity for the most impacted communities and flexibility and compliance for the covered entities. However, this new and innovative program requires both strengthening and further development of implementation guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next commenter is John Talek. If you would begin, please.
Thank you. Hi, my name is John Talek. I'm a lifelong Oregonian. Last year, I was evacuated from my camping trip in Sisters due to a raging wildfire and escaped to my family's home outside of Silverton. That very next morning, I was evacuating my family from another wildfire. Luckily, our home was still standing after the wildfire season, only for the ice storm to inflict thousands of dollars of damages to our home only months later. These disasters were ever so likely to the impacts of greenhouse gases on the climate. I'm excited about the DEQ's opportunity to formulate the climate protection plan, as it is a critical step for Oregon to take part in mitigating the worst impacts of climate change. I was surprised by three things and urged the DEQ to revise the rules and strengthen the CPP. First, not only were the proposed rules for the cap and reduce regulations based on outdated reduction targets, but the regulations would have resulted in failure for fossil fuel suppliers to meet the reduction goals. Secondly, I was very disappointed to learn that the proposed rules had a limited scope of regulations on stationary emitters and that the DEQ will let stationary polluters set their own regulations. Finally, while the community climate investment plan is integral to ensuring climate justice, the proposed rules make it difficult for frontline communities to access the funds by preventing community organizers from helping. These failures are not in line with DEQ's equity goals and impact Black, Indigenous, and people of color the most. The DEQ must revise their rules to align with up-to-date science-based reduction targets by increasing the 2030 target reductions and ultimately reaching carbon neutrality by 2050. The DEQ must expand the stationary polluters that it regulates to include frac gas power plants. The DEQ must set overarching emission targets for those polluters. The Bear approach is a flawed approach. The DEQ must strengthen the CCI to better serve frontline communities and support environmental justice. Thank you for the hard work. Keep going and strengthen the climate protection plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next commenter is Grace Brailer. If you would please begin.
Good evening. Thank you so much for this opportunity to comment. My name is Grace Brailer, and I'm the Oregon Climate Action Plan for and policy manager for Beyond Toxics. As the thousands of Oregonians who have taken the time to weigh in on this incredibly complex program have made clear, the Climate Protection Program truly is a critical opportunity to set Oregon on the right path to reducing the effects of climate change in our state and nationwide. Thus, we echo many of the concerns that have been shared tonight. The scope of entities covered by the draft program is impermissibly narrow, even excluding our state's biggest polluters. The program should follow the science and aim to cut covered emissions in half by 2030, and mandatory emissions reductions targets are needed for stationary sources. However, as currently written, the rules place the burden of greenhouse gas emissions and their co-pollutants like smog-forming and cancer-causing VOCs on BIPOC and other disproportionately vulnerable communities. Further, the rules must be revised to ensure that community climate investments result in real benefits in disproportionately impacted communities, including low-income, rural, tribal, and BIPOC communities. The rules must guarantee that each CCI credit results in at least a 1-to-1 reduction in climate pollution, and the rules must ensure that an exact percentage of CCI projects will benefit those on the front lines of harm from climate damage. We support the imposition of limits on the number of credits polluters can purchase and prohibitions on banking these credits indefinitely. Please also ensure that the administrative requirements associated with sponsoring CCI projects neither exclude nor unnecessarily overburden community-based organizations with direct ties to environmental justice communities. So please take the outpouring of concerns from so many Oregonians to heart as you work to finalize this important proposal. People are struggling, they are concerned, and they are expecting bold climate action. So thank you so much for your time, service, and your consideration.
Thank you. Our next commenter is Michael Allen. If you would please begin.
Good evening. My name is Michael Allen. I'm an elder living on the coast near Florence, Oregon. I'm the leader of the Oregon chapter of Elders Climate Action and the founder of the Florence Climate Emergency Campaign. As a climate activist, along with my wife, Pat, we've conducted climate strikes every Friday in front of the Florence City Hall for over 2 years and collected over 500 signatures on a petition. Despite our persistence, our Mayor Henry and the City Council have ignored our demands to act on the climate crisis. As a result, my efforts have expanded to support Lane County in the development of a county-wide climate action plan, one that we hope will set an example for our small community of Florence and its elected officials. Now, with the state of Oregon proceeding to form its own Oregon Climate Action Plan, I've turned my attention to this important effort to address our ever-increasing climate crisis. I did look closely at the state's goals and compared them with the goals set by the Paris Climate Agreement. Unfortunately, I find that Oregon's goals fall short of what is needed to cut greenhouse gas emissions on a timeline necessary to prevent us from exceeding a 1.5 degrees Celsius rise in temperature by the year 2050. It is my fondest hope that the rules to implement the Oregon Climate Protection Program are tightened both in mitigation levels and in shorter time frame. Many of us that are struggling at the local and regional levels rely on the state of Oregon to set the appropriate example. Thank you for your attention in this important matter that will affect all of us, and most importantly, our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren.
Thank you. Chair George, at this time, that is the end of our pre-registered group. If Wilson Smith or Jamie Raylander are present, I ask that they use the raise hand function if they're on Zoom, or press *9 if they're by telephone. If their display name is something else, please change it to reflect your name, Wilson Smith, or your name, Jamie Raylander. And Chair George, looking quickly through our list, I don't see these two people who had previously signed up to present comments, so they may not be present. And at this time, Chair George, I believe we have taken all comments from our pre-registered commenters.
Okay, thank you very much. And just a couple little technical notes. Vice Chair Barrasso just reached out to me mentioning that his computer froze. and asking if we see him. I certainly see you, Vice Chair, but I too am having a little bit of internet instability, so I apologize to everybody for having my video off, but your words are, are what's most important, and please know that we are focusing on those. Thank you, Stephanie, for the update. And so it sounds as if all of our pre-registered requests for speakers have had at least an opportunity thus far. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so. Chair George, I believe all people who are pre-registered have had their opportunity to present comment.
All right, that's great to hear. We do know that we wanted to provide, as you mentioned, some opportunity for folks to offer to share their thoughts with us on the spot today. And we do know that we have about 14 participants with their hands raised. So I think it would be appropriate at this time to go ahead and allow those folks to share their thoughts with us.
And thank you, Chair George. I will move to the next slide, which provides instruction on how to request to present comment. There is one individual who I actually will bring up now as people read these directions. That person is Harvey Gale, who had previously requested to present comment. So Harvey Gale, if you would please present your 2 minutes of comment, and then we will return to the request list. Thank you.
Okay, can you all hear me and see me? Okay. Chair George, members of the EQC, my name is Harvey Gale. I'm the executive director of an association of retail stores for EPA certified wood stoves, gas fireplaces, and pellet stoves. Odds are you probably have one of these in your home. We are home heating experts. Oregonians want affordable energy choices. That includes natural gas, renewable energy gas. Nearly 70% of people prefer natural gas for heating their homes and for cooking. People prefer natural gas because it's reliable and affordable, and homeowners choose gas in part as an insurance policy against electricity rate increases and power outages. Reducing access to natural gas will reduce consumer choice. It will negatively impact our businesses and result in higher prices and lost jobs, especially in our industry. We all support clean energy, but electrification removes energy choice and creates an inflexible system of energy distribution. Do not mandate to remove billions of dollars of natural gas infrastructure. We need that to provide energy choice. In the future, we'll need that for renewable gas and green hydrogen that will flow through these same systems. For many Oregonians, heating with EPA certified wood and pellet stoves provide energy choice. Many communities in rural settings rely on biomass. It's affordable, renewable energy from the sun. Trees sequester carbon that's later turned into energy. Responsible wood heat is an affordable, and it utilizes our forest resources in a responsible way. Thank you very much.
And thank you. At this time, Chair George, I will need just a moment to write down the list and give you a best estimate of how many people have requested to present comment. So Chair George, it'll be just one moment, please.
Sure.
And Chair George, it appears that 26 people are requesting to present comment. Our hearing this evening is scheduled to end at 7 p.m. Based on timing for that, it does appear that we can take approximately 13 of those comments. So Chair George, if you would like to note or poll the commissioners on their preference at this time, I will again continue writing down names.
Okay, well, I think I'm going to make a suggestion to the group, and then commissioners and or director, please give me any feedback if you wish to. What I would like to do is hear from just as many of these folks as we can, allowing Stephanie to just start proceeding through the list once she is ready. And although we wish we could hear from absolutely everybody in person, we do also have the benefit of the extended comment period. And so people are going to be able to get their thoughts to us one way or the other. So my recommendation is to just continue and move through as many of these commenters as we can until 7 o'clock.
Thank you, Chair George. With that information, at this time, Dr. Dave, if you would please begin.
Hi, my name is Dave White of Climate Change Truth Incorporated. You guys talk about correct science. The Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change reports are science fiction. For example, when Jim Skea said we needed to lower our emissions by 45% by 2030, he was basing that on a statement in the mitigation chapter that had no references to anything. They made it up. And that was on page 90. On page 100 was their only probability for their solution to work to lower emissions of CO2 was 66%. That's on cctruth.org. More than 20 PhDs and I participate in what's known as the Expert and Government Review of the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change. It's called the IPCC Ignores Key Data on the homepage of cctruth.org. Also on cctruth.org are 13 presentations I've given at climate change. The average residence time for CO2 is 150 years. The reason why residence time is like standing water in your kitchen sink. The water's residing longer. The reason why the residence time is 150 years is we used to have 390 billion tons of photosynthesis. We only have 8.6 billion left. And that is the actual value of net zero CO2 emissions is 8.6, not the 28 the IPCC lied about. Their global warming potential model is fake. It assumes equal greenhouse gases, which will never be the same. And for the chapter or working group 1, we found in Annex 2 or Appendix 2, 14 published manuscripts that show that CO2, then methane, then nitrous oxide and ozone in that order. So cctruth.org, you guys are completely deceived about climate change.
Thank you.
All right.
Our next commenter is, I have Ann Turner. If Ann Turner is still present, please begin.
Hey, Ian, hold on just 1 minute. I apologize for the interruption. I just want to observe that we did in fact start about 15 minutes late, so we'll go until 7:15. Sorry for that interruption. Ian, we'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Chair George and members of the commission. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Dr. Ann Turner. I'm a volunteer with Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility and a retired physician who worked with vulnerable families at Virginia Garcia Memorial Health Center. Although vulnerable communities are disproportionately harmed by climate warming, the recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report tells us that the survival of all humanity is threatened. Time is of the essence. The IPCC has given us less than 10 years to prevent irreversible warming of our planet. The UN concluded that substantially and rapidly reducing methane is the only way to meet the international goal of keeping warming under the 1.5 degrees centigrade goal. The methane lever, methane that traps heat 80 times better than CO2 in the first 20 years, is the bright light that can actually reduce warming. In fact, President Biden has issued a methane challenge to us and allied nations to reduce methane levels by 30% by 2030. Therefore, I must urge the EQC and the DEQ to bring Oregon's gas, which is methane, power plants under its climate protection program and include the goals to reduce their emissions by at least 50% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. These plants are the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases, CO2 and its evil twin, methane. We must use the lever of the climate protection program to reduce CO2 and methane emissions to protect us all, including the communities living near these facilities, communities that already experience greater health disparities. We must strengthen the climate protection program, as others have indicated, to achieve the goal of Governor Brown's executive order on climate change and respond to the Code Red for humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Next commenter is Dina T. Grossman. If you would please begin. And apologies, you will be asked to unmute and then you should be able to begin. Dina Grossman.
Yes, thank you. I would like to cede my time to Dan Saris of Columbia Riverkeeper.
Thank you, Dina. I do not see Dan Saris in our participants list, but I will note that.
In that case, if he's not there, then let me go ahead, please.
Fantastic. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. My name is Dina T. Grossman. I am the Columbia Riverkeeper composer in residence, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to comment, Chair George, and all the members of the Environmental Quality Commission. I agree with so many previous speakers, including Dr. Lori Powell and Theodora Songas, that the 6 largest climate polluters in Oregon are fracked gas power plants, yet DEQ is proposing to exempt these facilities from regulation. This is unconscionable. We must have the DEQ plan include the largest polluters, and they are the state's largest emitters. So please include the top climate polluters in Oregon and prioritize communities over polluters' profits. At this time of climate emergency, we must act to protect all of us, all our families, and the earth that we depend on. Thank you for the opportunity to comment and for your consideration.
Thank you for your time today. Our next commenter is Reverend Janet Parker. You may begin.
All right. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please continue, Reverend.
Thank you. My name is Janet Parker, and I'm a pastor in the United Church of Christ, and I really appreciate your holding this hearing. I have witnessed firsthand the harmful health effects of greenhouse gas emissions and smoke from drought-induced wildfires. While serving as a pastor in Salem, I ministered to a homeless woman who kept having to go to the hospital over and over again because of respiratory distress. And we know that air pollution has more severe effects on the unhoused population of our state. Later, while serving an unair-conditioned church in downtown Portland, we had to close the doors to the preschool when the heat and air pollution became too dangerous for children and staff. I have lost 2 African-American colleagues to premature death from cancers that were likely caused by exposure to air pollution and toxins that disproportionately plague communities of color. These examples show that harmful health impacts from climate change disproportionately affect frontline communities, as well as the very young and very old. That makes this an issue of moral concern. So I urge you to strengthen the draft climate protection program to better protect all of our citizens, especially our most vulnerable ones. And I have 3 asks. Please implement a cap that follows current science and requires a 50% reduction in climate pollution by 2030. Secondly, stationary source polluters and gas-powered plants should not be exempted from the cap. Pollution from these sources could increase under this proposal. It's as though the current DEQ proposal closes a window to climate pollution while opening the front door. Thirdly, I urge you to use the CCIs to prioritize investment in communities most harmed by fossil fuel emissions and climate change, BIPOC, low-income, and rural communities. Please strengthen this plan and follow the best science. It's a matter of life and death for so many in our state. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker has a display name of O'Rourke Sean, and please begin.
Yes, I'm with Local 290, a business agent with plumbers and steam fitters. Natural gas is a safe and reliable, affordable, as it captures methane from organic materials such as food, wood, and miscellaneous waste. It is the cleanest fossil fuel and provides reliable and affordable energy. It is a critical part of the energy solution in the Northwest. There's new technologies to meet these emissions, which will reduce the goals by 30% by 2030 and 100% by 2045. Bipartisan infrastructure bill invests in green hydrogen, $1 trillion in infrastructure spending, $8 billion in new funding to accelerate the development of clean hydrogen fuels. The Pacific Northwest has 75,000 miles of available pipelines to deliver hydrogen and need highly skilled employees to maintain them. Natural gas industry employs nearly 2 million Americans and is expected to add 3.5 million jobs by 2035. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. The next person in my speakers list is Kelly Hogan. Please begin.
Hello, thank you. My name is Kelly Hogan, and I serve as the Climate and Environmental Justice Advocate for Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon. Through a membership of 15 denominations and over 150 congregations, organizations, and interfaith partners, Ecumenical Ministries serves hundreds of thousands of diverse members of faith community across Oregon. Our members all share a core and common belief in our obligation to each other and to the earth. As such, we continually advocate for enforceable, measurable emissions reductions that are consistent with the demands of our children and youth and the recommendations of the world's best climate scientists. Therefore, we are urging the rules of the CPP be strengthened in line with the best available science and are adjusted to cut covered emissions in half by 2030. Furthermore, EMO believes in holding polluters accountable and stresses the need for all large industrial sources to be subject to mandatory emission reductions. Should they be exempt from the mandatory reductions, at the very least, we urge an unbiased third party to verify their emission reductions every 3 years or fewer. Lastly, EMO hopes the language around the community climate investments is strengthened to require a 1-to-1 ratio of reduction in climate pollution or co-pollutants, and that a specified percentage of CCI investments are guaranteed to communities on the front line of harm. As you construct the CPP, we hope you will prioritize the well-being of impacted communities and future generations, and we also urge you to adopt the plan on time by the end of the year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker in my list has a display name of Nicholas Cook. And please begin.
Hi, my name is Nick Cook, and I am an undergrad at Portland State University. And I'm not here to talk as a seasoned activist or an expert of any kind. This is honestly my first time talking in a situation like this. And we know after we've covered half of America with smoke for the past 2 years, after like this crisis has really emerged, we know it's bad. And we also know that we're on the same path of playing whack-a-mole as activists, scientists, and a lot of people spend their spare time just saying, hey, this is the science, this is what we know. And we know that a lot of times these plans are kind of fruitless and frankly bullshit. And I think this one has a lot of potential. I think a lot of people before me have said exactly what needs to be done to make it a plan that Oregonians deserve to have. And I really urge you to make it happen and I think I've heard the climate crisis is described as a leadership crisis, and I hope you guys step up. Thank you so much, and thank you for the time and energy that you've put into this plan.
Thank you. The next speaker in my list is Michael Carr. And Michael, you may begin.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Michael Carr, commenting on behalf of Western States Petroleum Association, WSPA, whose members include most of the large suppliers of fuel in Oregon, and as a result have over half the total compliance obligation in the CPP as designed. WSPA appreciates the considerations made by DEQ staff regarding treatment of biofuels in the CPP and the concept of CCI credits that can benefit disadvantaged communities. But WSPA is deeply concerned about the limited scope of participants in this proposed program. Successful market-based programs cover as much of the economy as possible, but this proposed program only covers a limited number of participants from the fuel sector under its declining cap. Further, this program is duplicative of Oregon's existing clean fuels program. WSPA has key requests for the EQC to provide direction to DEQ to eliminate the risk of severe unintended consequences and create a better CPP. First and most important, this program as designed does not create a true compliance pathway. Without a path to compliance, the program is prone to collapse with harm to Oregon motorists. Oregon CFP includes a safeguard that ensures it won't artificially constrain fuel availability. The same type of safeguard should be created for the CPP. We request that EQC direct DEQ to design and implement a robust safeguard in the event of a structural shortage of compliance instruments. The EQC should also direct DEQ to seek legislative authority where needed to broaden the scope of the CAP program. And a program review of the CPP once every 5 years is inadequate, given the concerns just outlined. The EQC should direct an annual review process. Finally, the CCI credit program still needs significant work. We will be providing more detailed written comments and will ensure these comments are provided to all commissioners. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Noelle Studer-Spivak. You may begin.
Thank you, Chair George and members of the Environmental Quality Commission. My name is Noelle Studer-Spivak with Families for Climate, representing 300 families in the Portland metro area. Most importantly, I'm a mother of 2 children rapidly moving toward their teen years. This is a weighty issue and I wasn't sure I'd be able to provide live testimony. I'm here to draw a connection between hope, the climate protection program, and mental health among young Oregonians. Presently, 2 young people dear to my heart are in residential facilities for depression and suicide. My 16-year-old goddaughter and my 14-year-old next door neighbor. And another young friend, age 15, took their life last year, devastating our whole community. They're not alone. We could all use some hope, but especially young people. The CCP cannot be a half-hearted program. Regulating almost half of the climate pollution is unacceptable. If science tells us we need 7% emissions reductions per year, we should be aiming for 8%, not 3 or 4%. A wholehearted plan to reduce Oregon's emissions would include every single large industry, cement plant, and especially fracked gas power plants. In a wholehearted program, community climate investments would have verifiable emissions reductions so EJ communities of color experience real improvements. And finally, sequestration is also part of the solution, but not totally included in the governor's directive right now. Cutting pollution alone will not get us there. We need to engage all Oregonians in this monumental transformation. Regarding mental health, elementary children could use some reassurance that our state's on the right track. My 8-year-old has taken to drawing a line down the middle of their picture showing 2 possible worlds. They draw a healthy green world on one side and a gray one with pavement ashes on the other. These 2 Crayola markers are drying up with overuse, so they dip the tips in water. Has every generation done this? Older youth, they can tell when grown-ups are only planning to take them halfway to the reductions required by science, and they cannot tolerate it. As I shared earlier, they are in real danger of giving up. In summary, today's children are counting on you and DEQ
They're counting on you to make the CPP strong enough and comprehensive enough to get them all the way to a healthy future. You are their only hope. Thank you for your work and service on the commission.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Brian Posewitz. And you may begin.
Yes, hi, thank you, Chair George and members of the commission. My name is Brian Posewitz, and tonight I'm here representing myself only. Thank you, first of all, for just taking on this task of developing rules to address climate change, and also for the chance to comment tonight. I will just note that I did attempt to pre-register, I feel like a week ago, and the spots were already filled. So I don't know what that suggests about the process in terms of how many people are trying to give you oral testimony and not being able to, but I'm glad that I was able to get on with that same day sign up here tonight. So let me first of all say my comments are based on the various summaries and presentations. I haven't actually read the text of the rule, so I apologize for any oversights. I agree with many of the things said tonight, particularly those encouraging a stronger program. In an attempt to offer something new, I want to just make 2 points. One is that unfortunately the rules will not address agriculture, particularly animal agriculture, which I think your studies and reports confirm are a significant source of greenhouse gas emissions, particularly from methane. Among these emitters are 3 Mile Canyon Farms near Boardman, which has about 70,000 cows and is one of the largest areas in the country. I know there's a statute that says DEQ can't regulate emissions from agriculture, but there are exceptions to that I think could be applied here. If not, I just want to flag the fact that agriculture, particularly animal agriculture, is a very big source of greenhouse gas emissions that is not being addressed. I also want to point out that, that there's a concept in greenhouse gas emissions where there's a distinction made between production-based emissions and consumption-based emissions. Production-based emissions being those that are emitted here, consumption being emissions anywhere that are generated by consumption here. And there was I saw some graphs presented at one of your meetings recently that showed while production-based emissions have been fairly stable in Oregon, consumption-based emissions continue to go up. And I think when we're talking about climate change, it doesn't really matter where the emissions get generated anywhere on Earth, they're going to affect us here, including environmental justice communities here. And so I know that's a tough regulatory environment, but to the extent anyone can be looking at that and starting to address that, I think that would be a great idea. Thank you very much for the chance to comment.
Thank you. Our next commenter is Bascom Grecian.
Yes, hello. A couple things I wanted to say. I'm kind of surprised by it just seems there's a lot of comments that don't really back up what the fuel industry provides Americans and Oregonians. You know, fuel, and we're talking fossil fuels, they provide low-cost energy to all kinds of families, and our whole world runs on fossil fuels. And it's really unrealistic to think that reducing greenhouse gases is going to really make any sort of difference when it's never really been proven in the first place. I mean, the current atmospheric carbon dioxide rise is actually caused by the deforestation of the Amazon jungle and not carbon dioxide emissions. And over 2,000 scientists agree to that. There is no statistical relationship between emissions of carbon dioxide and atmospheric carbon dioxide rise. And the problem is, you know, a lot of people want to go along with the climate change narrative, but any policy towards CO2 emissions must recognize that CO2 emissions are a global issue, and global emissions are rising because of developing countries and their increased use of fossil fuels. And the US doesn't cause this. So any policy towards CO2 emissions must recognize that CO2 emissions is a global issue. And the developing world overwhelmingly uses fossil fuels because it's by far the most lowest cost and reliable energy, unlike wind energy, which is completely unreliable when the wind doesn't blow, and and solar energy, which is unreliable when there's clouds overhead. You know, I just think that, you know, we really ought to be careful that we don't hamper economic development with all of this. And, you know, we love fossil fuels, and fossil fuels runs American life.
Thank you very much. Our next commenter is Krista Bangsund, and you may begin.
Thank you so much, Chair George, members of the commission, and Director Whitman. My name is Krista Bangsund, and I thank you for the opportunity to comment. And I recognize this has been a really long day for you. Like, our part of the meeting seems long, and you've been going all day. I really appreciate the goals of the CPP to ambitiously reduce greenhouse gases and center climate justice communities. I don't want to repeat the previous comments. I echo my fellow Oregonians' concerns about non-covered entities and that the targets may not be strong enough. But I also really worry that we could spend another year in revisions and we simply can't wait. I think it's a false choice to suggest we can either strengthen the program or launch it soon. And so what I would urge the EQC to do is to adopt the CPP now, and simultaneously task the DEQ to get to work on CPP2, expanding the CPP to cover all greenhouse gas emitting entities in Oregon and to further improve targets. And in parallel, I'd urge the EQC to require the DEQ to measure the current impact of greenhouse gas emissions on communities of color and other climate justice communities. If we don't measure the current impacts, we can't assure that the CPP and the community climate investments actually reduce the impact on those communities. And in addition, please assure that people from climate justice communities are the majority members on the next rulemaking committee, and also committee that could be in place to approve community climate investments. So please start now. Please don't give ground in this comment period on the targets, the social cost of carbon, the percent of CI offsets. Please reserve the right to further strengthen the CPP as we learn more, both in terms of climate science and from measuring the early impacts of the CPP. You can hear we are scared for our future, and you have the power to help us. So please do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next commenter has a display name of Carolyn's iPad. I apologize. A person in Carolyn's iPad should be prompted to unmute and present comment at this time. I will try once more.
Okay. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Hello, commissioners. My name is Carolyn Partridge, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. Along with many other Oregonians, I am very concerned about the recent heat waves, the numerous wildfires, and the severe drought in the Klamath Basin, which deprived farmers and tribes of their livelihoods this past summer. These devastating impacts of climate change will only get worse if no action is taken. We have a chance to address Oregon's share of responsibility by crafting an ambitious climate protection plan. Many other governments, corporations, and international organizations have spoken of the need to curb emissions, yet they have set reduction goals on a timeline far into the future when our children and grandchildren will be adults. This has made it easy to dodge and delay the tough policy decisions that need to be made today if these goals are to be realized. A prime example is the Paris Climate Accords of 2015. After 6 years, only one country is on track to meet its voluntary reduction targets. We are running out of time, and bold, enforceable action is required. Offsets, exemptions, and free allowances to major polluters will not get us out of this mess. We need to drastically curtail greenhouse gas emissions. The emission budget in the CPP should be more stringent and should cover all major sources of pollution. Please strengthen the proposed plan, taking into consideration the points made by previous speakers. We need a plan that is sufficient to address the scope of the problem we are facing and time is of the essence. Thank you for putting in such a long day.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dan Kirshner.
Thank you, Chair George and members of the commission. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Dan Kirshner. I'm the Executive Director of the Northwest Gas Association, representing gas utilities and pipelines that serve 2 million residents and 85,000 businesses that employ tens of thousands of Oregonians. I just want to start by saying thank you to Director Whitman and the DEQ for giving us an extension on the comments. Very much appreciate it. This is a complex rule and we just need time to process. And so the extra time is very helpful to ensure that we get good, cogent comments into you in this regard. I do want to say that it is important to recognize that we do have to take action here in Oregon. At the same time, action that Oregon takes will not have much impact on what we're experiencing today, but we do need to take action. And that action should be taken in a pragmatic way that preserves to the greatest extent possible affordability and reliability. I have written comments that I'll provide, so I won't take much time. I'll just summarize the main points of my written comments. First is, it's unusual to see that one way to achieve the objectives is by shifting loads from covered entities, gas and liquid fuels, to uncovered entities, in particular electricity. That's just a bit of a shell game going on there. Second, we think that there needs to be more flexibility with regard to compliance. The CCI should be expanded, offsets should be allowed. Wherever we can make a difference affecting climate action, we should be able to do that here in Oregon. Secondly, thirdly, there should be a cost cap to protect vulnerable energy users in the region. And finally, I think we need to be very clear about the reliability impacts on our grid. We need to be very careful about ensuring that we have the energy we need whenever we need it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next commenter is Lori, and you may begin.
Chair George and members of the commission, my name is Lori Doherty. I live in Salem. I've been studying climate change for many years, both in university classes and through personal inquiry. And what I learned motivated me to activism and policy advocacy for climate justice. We know climate change is a profound crisis and that we must deal with it at every possible scale, from the local to the global, and that includes within the state of Oregon. We are already experiencing its harmful impacts. We need the DEQ Climate Protection Program to live up to its name by taking bold steps to align with the science. A cap on emissions, which declines over time, is a good approach, but I am very concerned that reductions are not scheduled fast enough. Furthermore, the CPP as proposed will allow export of electric power from frack gas facilities and leave industrial sources of emissions outside the program cap. Allowing industrial polluters to choose their own best available emissions reduction technology is a loophole that looks to me more like a chasm into which the CPP is likely to fall and fail. DEQ must establish a mechanism to enforce declining emissions from industrial polluters. Industrial sources also emit toxic pollutants harmful to human and environmental health, most often falling on low-income and Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. A declining cap on industrial emissions will also make Oregon a healthier, more just, and equitable state. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Oriana, and you may begin.
Chair George and commissioners, for the record, my name is Oriana Maniera. I'm the Energy, Climate, and Transportation Manager at Verde. I was also a member of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee that helped provide guidance on the Climate Protection Program rules before you. Verde organizes in the Cully neighborhood in Portland, a frontline community full stop. It's the neighborhood nearest the airport. Our former office was across a diesel trucking corridor from a rail line. It's the site of an asphalt grinding facility that rains asphalt onto people's yards and homes. It's also home to Owens Brockway, one of the largest polluters in the state. Cully is mostly low-income Latinx and Indigenous community members, with many Black and other people of color communities as well. I was initially heartened by the number of environmental justice voices included on the RAC. Normally there are 1 or 2. This time there were 7. I was hopeful that the representatives of environmental justice communities would be heard out. If we had been heard, Owens Brockway would be fully covered and accountable in such a way that we could guarantee that the air Cully residents breathe would improve substantially. If we had been heard, the mostly Latinx communities near Hermiston who are exposed to emissions from natural gas generation would not be left behind. Yes, House Bill 2021 bans the siting of future natural gas generation, and it will phase out all future fossil fuel generation that is consumed in the state by retail and direct access customers. But it does not ensure that these facilities cannot wheel their power to other states with less progressive clean energy electricity policies, or that data centers or mining operations can't purchase these power plants to consume energy on site. These are fatal loopholes, and we urge the EQC to consider legal analysis as to how the state can close them. If we had been heard, they would be. If we had been heard, the CCIs would be designed to serve environmental justice communities only and not industry. They would ensure that real emissions reductions and positive health impacts, and they would be administered in ways that are easy for organizations and tribal governments. Environmental justice representatives can still be heard, and the feedback we have shared in our written comments makes extensive and concrete suggestions for how the climate protection program rules can be still improved by EQC amendment. Environmental justice communities deserve bold, equitable, science-based climate action from the state of Oregon. Thank you for your time and for your committed action to develop a strong climate protection program that protects environmental justice communities.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Amelia Porterfield.
Thank you, Chair George and members of the commission. My name is Amelia Porterfield. I'm Senior Policy Advisor for the Nature Conservancy in Oregon. Thanks for the opportunity to provide comments on the Climate Protection Program draft rules today. Oregon has a responsibility to address our contributions to climate change and develop the necessary responses. DEQ has the opportunity and the directive to develop a robust and functional program that meets our state's climate goals, including setting an ambitious cap and emissions reductions timeline that ensures necessary greenhouse gas reductions are met while promoting just transitions in Oregon's frontline communities. We appreciate DEQ's dedicated efforts to build the CPP over the past year during the scoping and rulemaking that led to these draft rules. However, the program's rules require some targeted adjustments to achieve the necessary outcomes it seeks. We encourage you to make the following improvements to the CPP so it meets Oregon's climate goals. First, to follow the best available science, the CPP must target emissions reductions in regulated sectors of 50% by 2030 and 90% by 2050. Second, DEQ should ensure all industrial stationary sources are included within the mandatory declining emissions targets under the program. And third, community climate investments should be guaranteed to support communities that are disproportionately impacted by climate change. Further, we hope DEQ doesn't preclude the opportunity to invest in sequestration projects like urban tree canopy or floodplain restoration that have clear co-benefits to reduce climate burdens on communities while supporting equitable outcomes and maintaining environmental integrity. Oregon deserves a robust climate program, and with some targeted strengthening, these draft rules provide that foundation. The extreme wildfires, droughts, and weather events of the past year served as a sobering reminder that climate crisis is already here, and it underscores the need to act swiftly. We strongly encourage that the above changes be incorporated into the final rule so that Oregon meets its climate goals, and we urge the EQC to move forward in approving an ambitious climate program by the end of this year. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Our next commenter is Amanda Astor.
Chair George, Director Whitman, and members of the commission. For the record, my name is Amanda Astor. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a forester with degrees in forest management and forest carbon, and I'm the forest policy manager for Associated Oregon Loggers. Although today my comments align with a far larger coalition of business and natural resource organizations who are for reasonable and implementable climate solutions. AOL represents nearly 23,000 rural Oregonians who provide Oregon with firefighting capacity and many natural climate solutions. As I watched the RAC from the sidelines, it struck me that questions from the members were rarely addressed, and the proposal from DEQ never wavered. The RAC seemed to be purely perfunctory, and the rule baked before rulemaking began. Because this rulemaking will significantly change how Oregon does business, getting this program right the first time is paramount. Regrettably, DEQ has missed the mark and been silent on reasonable recommendations from RAC members. According to a forthcoming and draft independent economic analysis, the program doesn't only result in severe negative effects for Oregonians, but also lasting negative effects. The program will result in Oregon becoming more isolated from its trade partners and significantly disrupt supply chains. These negative effects come in the way of decreased gross state product, losses in household purchasing power, regional employment losses, and massive increases in consumer costs for everyday goods and services. These negative effects are not evenly distributed throughout the state and most severely affect rural communities whose families drive longer distances to work, the grocery store, and for medical care, and have fewer alternatives available to heat their homes. For a program that was supposed to be steeped in equity, it sure has taken its eye off the ball. Although this stark truth is frustrating, I did want to say thank you for giving us more time to respond to the proposed rule, and AOL hopes the extended comment period will also result in additional public hearings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next commenter is Damon Mott's Story.
Chair George, can you hear me? Good. Okay. Chair George and members of the Environmental Quality Commission. For the record, my name is Damon Mott's Story with Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility, a 40-year-old organization with 2,800 health professional members and public health advocates statewide. Guided by the values of public health and medicine, we seek a healthy, just, and peaceful world for all. In 1985, we shared the Nobel Peace Prize with our international affiliate for our work in advocating for nuclear disarmament during the Cold War. This year, I feel it has never been clearer what an impending existential threat climate change really is. And the climate crisis is here now, causing deadly heat waves and widespread water shortages and mega fires that burn bigger and longer each year. I have been advocating for climate action since I was in the 5th grade, believing that if enough of my neighborhood friends joined me in going vegetarian and recycling scrupulously and driving less, it would be enough. But 17 years later, it's extremely clear to me that nothing we have done up to this point is enough. And the construction of Line 3 through Anishinaabe Treaty Territory shows that, in fact, we are still headed in the wrong direction in so many ways. We just had a deadly heat wave that killed 116 Oregonians and became our second deadliest recorded natural disaster after the Heppner flood of 1903. This summer, an emergency room lung doctor squeezed in time to present with us on protecting health from wildfire smoke in between shifts of caring for heat stroke patients during a short lull between major COVID outbreaks. That lung doctor's favorite motto is "Don't burn things and breathe it in," whether it's the harmful health impacts of smoking cigarettes, breathing diesel pollution, or living in the shadow of massive industrial polluters. The fact of the matter is we must stop burning fossil fuels as fast as possible, which means we cannot allow loopholes for exported power or Bitcoin mining to prop up major polluting gas power plants or fall victim to the big tobacco-esque messaging that Northwest Natural has been sending to customers like myself. Allowing polluters to get out of eliminating pollution cannot live up to the stated goals of equity and environmental justice. Just like we turn to health experts to tell us how to keep each other safe in a pandemic, we can do the same here and heed that lung doctor's advice on a macro scale. I have signed us on to some larger comments that you will receive via email, but for now, I appreciate your time this evening, and thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much. The next person in my speakers list is John Lamy.
Thank you, Chairman George and members of the commission. My name is John Lamy, and my wife and I live in Jacksonville. We've heard so many excellent comments tonight. Can you hear me okay? I hope you can.
Yes, thank you. Please proceed.
It'll be very summary. I just have one big overarching comment and then 3 specifics. My main concern is that we not let the emerging CPP gradually creep toward being less than effective, and then therefore insufficient in the face of humankind's greatest threat. And you all have heard that many a time, but let's just be real careful that we don't water the thing down. Okay, specifics, 3 specifics. We should not exempt sectors or classes of players or industries, largest polluters. No, it's just kind of runs against common sense. And I know there's problems with implementation and so on, but let's don't do that. Second thing, the so-called clean fuels. If you study the chemistry of these things, it's an oxymoron. And yeah, I understand if we let methane just go up from landfill, that's bad news, 86 times worse than CO2. But to say that we're just going to let that go, we can do better. Third thing, the bear deal. That's a free pass. let's don't do that. Let's hold them accountable. So there's three things that I would suggest we tighten up. I would just say to Chair George and the rest of you, thank you so much for spending your time today, and to the governor for the EO 2004, just to say thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Eric Strid.
Thank you and good evening. My name is Eric Strid. I'm a retired high-tech CEO, now working for our children. I have studied Oregon climate policies in depth, including the proposed climate protection plan. Overall, I think CPP is a good proposal for incremental decarbonization impacts, but I believe it will fail long before we reach the emission requirements of 2030. I'll focus on three issues, all of which came with the specification of EO 2004. First, the reduction goal should be increased to 50% by 2030, as many others have noticed here. But importantly, the climate policy models clearly show that the faster we decarbonize these sectors and these subject sectors, the more money Oregon saves, mostly by cutting the billions of dollars of fossil fuels we import annually. This gain, not pain paradigm needs to be emphasized in the narrative. Secondly, the program focuses on attacking symptoms of the problem, emissions from fuels, instead of the root causes of the problem, which is emitting infrastructure. By far, the cheapest way to replace infrastructure is to steer the purchases of new infrastructure. But affluent customers who buy vehicles and furnaces care little about their fuel costs. Third and most problematic, the candidate technologies to effect a 50% reduction over the next decade will not be physically available in the quantity necessary, except electrification. For example, cutting transportation emissions 25% with renewable diesel would require the entire US production output of renewable diesel in 2020. And the production cost exceeds $5 per gallon. Oregon's capacity to produce RNG is even more limited, and RNG is more expensive than fossil methane. Compare those to electrification, which offers zero climate and toxic emissions, equivalent of about $1 per gallon cost, better energy resilience, plus other benefits. Why are we designing a program to incrementally squeeze fossil fuels instead of offering loans to all consumers and businesses for the money to buy cleaner, cheaper infrastructure? Thank you.
Thank you. Chair George, at this time, I have 5 people remaining on my speakers list who have not previously presented comment, and 1 person who has been a member of the Rules Advisory Committee and I believe was able to present comment at the hearing last week. As we near your 7:15 prior noted cutoff, wanted to check in, Chair George, to see if you and the commissioners would like to discuss next steps.
Thank you, Stephanie. I appreciate that. Commissioners, we have not too many folks left, a few. At the same time, we do want to be respectful. Everybody does have other demands on their time. Since one of the requesters had an opportunity to present testimony publicly before, I would say that any further comment would be welcomed in a written form. Commissioners, are you able to stay on to hear 4 more commenters? And also please know that it is perfectly reasonable to say that you have other requirements, but I do want to not make this decision alone and allow you to give your input.
So this is Commissioner Kyle. I can stay on for longer.
Oh God, I've got to. I'm gonna text my wife here, so there's a chance that I may end up needing to leave, but we'll see. It looks like she's putting the kids down right now. So.
Believe me, we understand, and we thank you so much for staying as long as you can. So, unless Director you see otherwise, what I would like to do is go ahead and hear the remaining commenters who have not previously had an opportunity to speak in public. We understand Vice Chair Barrasso may need to leave, and that is just fine. But otherwise, Stephanie, let's proceed with those last few folks, and then we'll need to thank everyone and look forward to receiving, we know, a great many comments that we will work with DEQ to work through.
Thank you, Chair George. As I understand, one or two of these folks may have had the opportunity to present previously, but at this time, I would ask that Catherine Williams, if you have not previously presented to the Commission, that you present your testimony at this time. And thank you.
Thank you. I would like to actually confirm if my colleague Mary Moreland, she was not sure if at the last hearing, she was number 2, I think, while there were still a few technical difficulties. If you all were able to hear her testimony, then I will cede my time. If you were not, then I will be very brief.
Thank you, Catherine. My colleague has informed me that yes, we did receive your colleague's comments. So if you would like to present comment, please proceed, but otherwise we will move on to the next commenter at this time.
Great. I will just say that, and my name is Catherine Williams with Northwest Natural. We have a plan in place to meet the emission reductions set out in the draft rule. And as we recently explained to the Public Utility Commission, Northwest Natural plans to utilize a variety of strategies to achieve CPP compliance, including expanding production of RNG and hydrogen and supporting incremental demand reduction. We will be providing extensive comments and we will just cede the rest of our time. And thank you very much for allowing us to be in the queue here at the end of the evening.
Thank you very much. With that, I would ask that we move on to our next commenter. Display name is Mickey. If you have not previously presented comment in hearing, we ask that you do present your comment now to the Commission.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Please proceed.
Hi, I'm Mickey Barnes. I work with Oregon Aviation Watch. And I'm going to submit some written testimony, but I want to thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak tonight. I do feel that the failure of Oregon's climate protection program to regulate aviation-generated greenhouse gases and other pollutants is indefensible and hypocritical. Every airport in the state should be required to reduce global warming and toxic emissions out of respect for the overall health of the planet, as well as current and future Oregonians. Oregon has a total of 420 airports. Only 7 are commercial passenger facilities. Many of these also accommodate private and recreational pilots, as well as flight training activity. The remaining 413 are general aviation airports that predominantly serve the 1/4% of the population affluent enough to fly out of these facilities. These people are responsible for pumping nationwide, this 1/4% of the population, 450 tons of lead into the environment every single year. Closer to home, Hillsborough Airport is pumping close to a ton or more of lead into the environment every single year. According to the EPA, NEI, I think it's something like 1,200 pounds just in landing and takeoff, but that doesn't include all the overflights and flight training and ground run-ups. But I think it's really important to consider the lead is responsible for ADHD, lower IQ, lifelong health problems, and coronary heart disease. Something needs to be done to address aviation in Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next commenter is Bill Harris. And you may begin.
Can you hear me speaking?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. For me, Chairperson George and Commission, I'm Bill Harris. I'm associated with the Community for Earth Committee at the Unitarian Church. Able, skilled staff have spent many months assembling good rules. They must be accepted in time to start the program this winter. I have 3 specific suggestions. I'll speak only about community climate instruments. They are complex but valuable and have a variety of benefits. They furnish flexibility to polluters unable to meet greenhouse gas limits for a period. Their purchase finances community-based action, which trains to green jobs that diminish greenhouse gas production by promoting weatherization, appliance and bulb efficiency, heat pumps, and human health in the community. And now the suggestions. 1, I suggest that CCI rules selected include promotion of electric transportation by establishing charging stations and support of electric car co-ops in impacted communities. 2, special programs for working lands to maximize their storing of carbon should be considered. 3, each polluting entity should be limited to a maximum of about 10% of their annual goal in CCIs at a time that at any one time, and each approved CCI needs to be estimated by established methods to be diminishing by 1 ton the greenhouse gas to make the program really accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person in the speakers list is Inga.
Good evening. I am encouraged that you are staying to hear to all the voices that come to you about this super important issue. You have a tough job, that is obvious. You hear a divergent group who want to remain with as is benefits and not make rapid changes. And yet the science is so very clear. In fact, the models that presented the hazards are now happening, the effects are happening earlier than anticipated. And so to have a timeline that does not meet what is absolutely necessary in greenhouse gas emissions means to me that you're inflicting pain about changes and you're not going to get where we need to be. If the task is to reduce emissions, then we can't exclude big corporate polluters. We cannot exclude certain industry sectors. We cannot have caps that don't work. We've got to bite the bullet and recognize that Oregonians have done tough things before. They've passed the bottle bill. They've passed land use planning. They have created beaches that we can access. We can do this, as Angela Merkel said when she accepted refugees that cost her popularity points. So I would urge you not to pass a tepid proposal, but to go for what really works. It is very, very disheartening to go to the Global Warming Commission meetings and see how the graphs of where we need to be are not anywhere near where we're going. So take a look at where we're headed down the road. And I'm going to be 80 years old soon. I will not live to see these horrible things that are predicted to happen, but I sure got a taste of it last summer. So you have a tough job. Don't bow out of the responsibility of get us to where we need to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chair George, that is our last speaker as indicated for this evening. And at this time, I would check back with you for the remainder of the night.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you to everyone, everyone who spoke, everybody who joined us to listen to these words. And clearly, this is incredibly important work. We heard a diversity of viewpoints, and we heard a lot of people whose passion and concern for our state are very real. We always thank you when you take time out of your busy life and your schedule to come spend time with us and share your thoughts with us. It truly is important to us. It sparks many conversations, and we do a lot of follow-up on what we hear with the ideas that you share with us here. So I just want you to know it means a great deal to all of us, and it is very important. And we thank you for hanging with us on a late night for the EQC. We will be back tomorrow, and we will do more of DEQ and EQC's work. And let's see, I think we come back together at 9:30 tomorrow morning.
Yes, Chair
so
George.
thanks, staff. And again, I want to thank all our staff who have hung with us tonight. It's been a long day, but it's been a very, very important day for work and for listening to one another. And that is always of good service to our work. Please, everybody, have a good and safe evening. And for those of us who will be joining us tomorrow at 9:30, we will see you then. We will be in recess until 9:30 tomorrow morning. Take care.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Chair George. This is Stephanie Caldera, EQC Assistant. We will close the recording for tonight. If our Spanish language interpreter is still with us, please relay again, thank you, good evening, and we appreciate everyone's time tonight.
Muchas gracias, buenas noches, agradecemos su tiempo que estuvieron con nosotros esta noche. Muchas gracias una vez más.
Thank you. Good night.
Adiós, buenas noches. Good night.